Mr. Frazier, I'm going to make you a co-host, which should mean you should be able to mute and unmute yourself at will.
All right, next on the agenda, since this is our first meeting of the year, we go into the election of officers, appointments, and regular board meeting schedule for the calendar year. Mr. Curry, I think you typically run these quite well.
Yes, I will, as I have in past years, I'd be happy to start you off with the chairperson position, and then depending on who the chair is, continue on at their interest. The way this process has worked for Rappahannock County is that the board will consider a number of motions or a number of nomination cycles to select names to enter into an overall resolution that will be adopted after all of the different positions are considered and identified through those nominations and votes. They begin with chairperson, move on to vice chairperson, and then several other positions. The last item on the organizational resolution is the meeting schedule, and then the different provisions that would allow you to delay a meeting due to weather issues like you did for this particular meeting.
Never happens.
Yeah. So that said, I will work through these nomination cycles in a similar manner to Robert's rules. We'll seek nominations for the positions, keep the floor open to nominations. Seconds aren't needed to nominate. Once all nominations have been made, then you will be asked to vote for the person that you would select for that position by stating their name. I'll do my best to switch up the order as we go through them. First on the list is the chairperson to serve for the next calendar year through the beginning of next year, January 2023, up to when you do this again at that time. So I'll open the floor to nominations for chairperson.
Mr. Curry, I would like to put forward Debbie Donahue as a nominee for chairperson with gratitude for her leadership over the course of the last year.
Are there any other nominations for chair? And Mr. Frazier, if you just make clear that you can hear us and we can hear you.
I'm here, yes.
Thank you. The last call for nominations for chair.
Well, I mean, I guess I have some questions because we've had some meetings this year where we've canceled regularly scheduled meetings and held special meetings, which is very disruptive, I think, to our schedules and the public schedules. And I would just wonder if we're going to have, you know, after we have a consensus of any organization, are we going to have canceled meetings and rescheduled meetings? And we had several issues with noticing this past year as well, which was very inconvenient. So I just have some concerns, and I'd put forth Keir Whitson's name for chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Smith, and not knowing the rules here, I don't know if I'm allowed to decline a nomination. I'll just leave it on the table then. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other nominations from the floor? I'll close nominations. You have a slate of Debbie Donahue and Keir Whitson. When it's time for your vote, just state the name of the person you wish to be chair. Mr. Carney.
Debbie Donahue.
Mr. Frazier.
None of the above.
Ms. Smith.
Keir Whitson.
Thank you again.
Mr. Whitson.
Oh, Debbie Donahue.
And Ms. Donahue.
Debbie Donahue.
Ms. Donahue will be your chair. Ms. Donahue, would you like me to work through the rest of these, or would you like to do that?
Now, I'd appreciate it if you continue.
Okay. The next position is vice chairperson. Similarly, I'll open nominations for vice chairperson.
Mr. Curry, I would like to nominate Keir Whitson for vice chair.
Are there any other nominations for vice chair?
I'd nominate Ron Frazier for vice chair.
I have Mr. Whitson and Mr. Frazier on the floor for nominations for vice chair. Are there any other nominations? Hearing none, I will Close nominations and have the vote. Ms. Smith? how do
Mr.
you-
Frazier?
Mr. Whitson?
Whitson.
Mr. Carney?
Kier Whitson.
Ms. Donahue?
Mr. Whitson.
Mr. Frazier?
I'll stick with the program, none of the above.
Mr. Whitson will be your vice chair. Next appointment is the board's representative to the Rappahannock Rapidan Regional Commission. This has typically been the chair in the past, although that is not a requirement of the body. Open the floor to nominations for representative to the Rappahannock Rapidan Regional Commission.
Mr. Curry, it's my understanding that this position normally tracks with the chairmanship, and therefore I will nominate Debbie Donahue to serve as our rep to the Rappahannock Rapidan Regional Commission.
Are there any other nominations for your representative on the RRRC?
I would have used that acronym if it had come to mind quickly, because the alternative is a tongue twister.
Hearing no other nominations, you have one nomination on the floor, Ms. Donahue, and she'll be your appointee by acclamation. Next is the Board of Supervisors representative to the Rappahannock County Planning Commission. Open the floor to nominations for your representative to the Planning Commission.
I would nominate Ms. Christine Smith.
Mr. Frazier nominates Ms. Smith. Any other nominations as representative to the Planning Commission?
Mr. Curry, I will nominate Kier Whitson.
It's been the board's practice to put someone different on there every year since I've been on this board. It was Mr. Parrish originally, and then myself, and then Mr. Frazier, and then Mr. Whitson. I think it's good to have a different voice on the Planning Commission. I don't necessarily want to be next in the rotation. I wonder if Mr. Carney would be willing to serve.
Is that a nomination?
If he's willing to serve, it is.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith, for the confidence in me. I would, at this point, decline, just so that I can sort of get my feet under me, starting here on the board, but thank you.
If you make a nomination, I support it.
Well, I really think that that we really do need to keep the practice of rotating in. And I mean, I really do think that Mr. Carney would be a good choice.
Is that a
There's
nomination?
quite a bit of seniority on that body, so I mean, I think it functions very well. So I would put Mr. Carney's name forward.
Are there any other nominations for your representative to the Planning Commission? All right, hearing none, I'll close nominations and I'll work through the vote order. Ms. Donahue,
Mr. Whitson.
Mr. Frazier,
Ms. Smith.
Ms. Smith,
Mr. Carney?
Mr. Whitson,
Whitson.
and Mr. Carney.
Mr. Whitson.
Mr. Whitson will be your representative. The next position is the Board of Zoning Appeals representative to the Rappahannock County Planning Commission. Open floor to nominations.
Do we have a recommendation from the BCA?
The BZA did not hold their December meeting, therefore they did not make a recommendation. As a body, I reached out to the chair and suggested that he inform his body that if the individuals wanted to make a recommendation, they should reach out to a board member to express their interest.
I would make a motion that we table it till February.
The ordinance sets this date as the date that the appointment will be made. Given that it's stated in ordinance, I don't know that you should really be able to put it off by motion.
And I'll note that last year, the BZA did make a recommendation for its representative to the Rappahannock County Planning Commission, and our local governing body did not in fact accept that recommended appointment. So it seems that we are in a position where we can make a decision, especially if we're constrained by the ordinance.
Well, I mean, y'all have voted against their recommendation several times, but I never have.
Are there any nominations for Board of Zoning Appeals representative to the Planning Commission?
I'll nominate Steph Ritter.
Well, I'll put Julie Gibson's name in nomination because I believe she's the only one that currently is a certified zoning, a BZA member that has at least completed the training to my knowledge.
Have Steph Ritter nominated by Mr. Whitson and Julie Gibson nominated by Mr. Frazier. Are there any other nominations? Hearing none, I'll close nominations and move to the vote. Mr. Frazier,
Gibson.
Ms. Smith,
Gibson.
Mr. Whitson,
Ritter.
Mr. Carney,
Ritter.
Ms. Donahue.
Ritter.
Ritter.
Ms. Ritter will be your representative to the Planning Commission from the BZA. Next is representative to the Rappahannock River Basin Commission. This body also accepts an alternate, so take nominations for the representative and the alternate to the Rappahannock River Basin Commission.
I'll nominate Mr. Carney to serve as the primary representative to the Rappahannock River Basin Commission.
And you're welcome to nominate an alternate as well, or?
If my colleagues wish for me to remain there, I'd be willing to continue to serve as an alternate, but I'm not going to nominate myself.
I'll make that nomination.
Thank you.
Are there any other nominations for your representative or alternate to the Rappahannock River Basin Commission? Hearing none, I'll close nominations, and those appointments will be made by acclamation. Mr. Carney, your representative, and Mr. Whitson, your alternate. Next is a representative on the Public Safety Committee and LEPC, which the body serves as members as part of that body. Historically, this has been two individuals. There has been some discussion of whether it would be more appropriate to have one individual, so a second board member could attend those meetings and not make a quorum of the board, but leave that open to the board, and accept nominations for a Public Safety Committee.
Just one point of clarification, Mr. Curry. The two Board of Supervisors representatives to the Public Safety Committee, is that written, or has that just been a tradition?
I wasn't able to find any Board of Supervisors action that define that. There is rules of procedure that the Public Safety Committee developed that recognizes that there are two board members. If the Board of Supervisors has not adopted a charter for this body that I'm aware of, that said if the board appoints one member, the Public Safety Committee could amend their rules of procedure to reflect that.
I guess my question there, just procedurally, should that provision of their rules of procedure be altered in advance, or does it not matter?
It's
Should we go
a
this
document of the committee to manage the committee, and not, the Board of Supervisors looked through this process a year and a half, 2 years ago, and considered adopting a charter and formalizing the mission and the membership, did not, left that in the hands of the Public Safety Committee to manage the rules on their own as they saw fit, and they did update those rules of procedure at that time. So those rules and procedures aren't binding on the Board of Supervisors. But I think it's up to the board on how you want to handle this situation.
Yeah, it did occur to me, I attended recently with Ms. Donahue, and we were there as guests, and we were there primarily to talk about the CenturyLink challenges in the county. And I know that each one of us in our own voting districts will encounter public safety issues, perhaps specific to our districts, as occurred with the CenturyLink issue. And so I do wonder if we ought to limit the assignment to just one member of our board so that others might attend when they're facing their own voting district specific public safety challenges. And I know Mr. Frazier in particular has been I'm very cautious about staying on the right side of FOIA rules vis-à-vis the Fire and Rescue Association. And here I think we potentially put ourselves in the same position. So I would put forward the nomination of Debbie Donahue as a single Board of Supervisors representative of the Public Safety Committee.
I think that's problematic because that's a 7-person body and you set yourself up in a voting situation where you may have a tie, which sometimes happens anyway. But generally odd numbers of committee members is preferable.
Good point.
We could add, I assume, or they could, another member that isn't a supervisor in that position, couldn't they?
The board would add somebody, that body could recommend the board add somebody. This particular appointment or body is not controlled by ordinance as far as timing or anything like that. The two individuals that are on it, were on it last year, Ms. Smith and Mr. Frazier, were appointed by a similar resolution with their terms running through to this meeting. So if you don't nominate anybody today, there would be no representative. But I think the body could schedule meetings such that it waited till you dealt with this if you wanted to put it off a month.
Has anybody on this board talked to the Public Safety Committee about what they want from this board?
But could I interject with a question and a comment? I think we're really going down a rabbit hole here because the two supervisors that are appointed by the board represent the board. And all any single individual member would have to do was just simply ask the 1 or 2 members that are going to be at that meeting to make comment on that particular subject. So, I mean, just because CenturyLink has very few or maybe no services in the Jackson Magisterial District, if I was on that Public Safety Committee or Ms. Smith or Ms. Donahue or whoever is on there, they could make reference to the fact that we have these ongoing issues with either Verizon or CenturyLink. I think we're creating a problem here, and we've been talking about this for 10 or 15 minutes, trying to figure out a solution as to how many supervisors we're going to appoint to this body, and it's no reason for that.
Yeah, I really...
The supervisors that get appointed, regardless of who they are, what district they're from, represent the board and would have the authority to make reference to the problems that are ongoing in the community.
And there is a citizens representative, the sheriff attends, the Fire and Rescue Association representatives, our emergency services manager, Mr. Curry are all there. So I think saying, somehow that problems aren't brought forward is not correct, just based on representation.
Well, we're there.
Frazier, hold on, Mr. Frazier.
If it's the majority's
Sorry, Ms.
intention to appoint Ms. Donahue to every position, then why don't we just do that in the beginning? We would have saved about a half an hour of this organizational meeting.
I'm sorry, Mr. Frazier, Ms. Smith was speaking.
Well, and I think the other thing, it is a pretty complex organization because it does bring so many groups together. It's a cross-section of fire and rescue, the sheriff's office, the board of supervisors, citizen input, and our volunteer companies. So, there are a lot of cross-sections there, and I just think having 2 people on that committee, especially someone that has a history with it, I think is important. And I would be willing to continue to serve. I don't know if Mr. Frazier is willing to continue to serve.
Well, I'm certainly willing to serve again, but I'm just saying that if it's the intention of the majority that Mr. Whitson and Ms. Donahue serve on each one of the committees, then we could have saved a half an hour by just doing that up front.
So are there any nominations that anybody wants to make for
I nominated Debbie Donahue.
get that?
Yeah. And just to move this along, I'll nominate Olson. Well, I can't nominate 2 people.
I
Yeah, you
would
can.
also nominate Mr. Frazier. He was on there when I joined and has an institutional knowledge of the Public Safety Committee, which I think is very important because, like I said, it is a critical cross-section for a lot of county services.
I'll nominate Ms. Smith.
I was going to do that.
Go
I'll
ahead.
decline.
I'll nominate Ms. Smith.
I don't think it works. I don't think.
Well, I think you're going to have a problem when I don't show up for meetings.
Okay.
do that if you need to.
Well, we don't follow Robert's rules, so you can make up whatever rules you want right now.
So vote for
Any-
two?
Any
You
vote?
do not
anybody?
wish to,
Yeah, so as we work through
So I
the,
think a new face on that committee would be good. I've been on that committee for 4 years, and I understand the importance of having a fresh face and for people to get exposed to different committees, so you really have a sense of what goes on and not just hear a report every month.
Okay.
I do think that is very critical, but I think having a mix of someone who's had a long history or that, knows how that organization functions, plus some fresh blood, it's very healthy to be able to do that too.
okay, so it's Donahue and Frazier
so,
And Smith.
and Smith.
So
But
you're going to vote for two, basically, right?
well, if Ms. Smith is declining to be
So,
involved in Mr.
let's adopt the rule
Okay.
that
You're
we
welcome- someone's welcome to
honor
make a-
people declining because I think we all now have been in that position, so.
So you're declining, Ms. Smith?
Well, historically, people have been able to decline to serve, so
Okay.
I'm not really sure where this
I
is all
think it's
coming from.
reasonable.
Okay.
If that's the
Well,
case, if that's the case and there are no other nominations, you have two nominations on the floor in this position. This role has historically had two positions. The resolution's set up for two positions. If there are no other nominations, then Mr. Frazier and Ms. Donahue would be your selections by acclamation.
Okay, that was easy.
Good discussion.
Next position is the representative to the Fire Levy Board.
I'll nominate Ms. Smith.
Any other nominations to the Fire Levy Board?
I really am not sure I'm in a position to take that on this year. If someone else was willing to step forward and do it, that would be much appreciated.
Technically, it should only be 2 meetings a year. I don't know what your situation is, but
Probably three.
maybe 3.
Organizational.
Okay.
And the scope of work, my understanding now, is quite limited to review of,
Because they're
Company
using
re-
bookkeepers, it has definitely become an easier process.
So the body has worked over time to streamline the process, and the companies are doing a better job of following the process. So the work of the body is a little less onerous these days.
okay. I'll nominate Van Carney.
So you're withdrawing your nomination of Ms. Smith.
Yep.
Any other nominations for representative on the Fire Levy Board? And for the record, Mr. Carney, you may not be aware, this body is filled out by representatives from each district, and the board member from that district is to select a representative. So Mr. Parrish has selected a representative. You'll be able to consider whether you want that person to continue on or select somebody else outside of a board meeting.
And I'm happy to hand off information.
And if there's any interest, I'd be willing to do it. I believe my current assignments are limited to the planning commission. So if it's helpful to balance things out, I'd also be willing to do it.
So with that
I mean, I
said,
think the planning commission has a really full plate this year.
Well, that's
I mean,
why
I hope the planning commission has a really full plate this year.
Absolutely.
yeah, okay.
any last nominations for a representative on the Fire Levy Board? Hearing none, you have one, that's Mr. Carney, and he will be represented by acclamation. Next up is the representative to the Rappahannock Shenandoah Warren Regional Jail Authority Board. The county administrator also serves on this board. I'm currently chair of the board. So I'll open the floor to nominations for your representative to the RSW Regional Jail Authority Board.
I mean, I think Ms. Donahue has been our representative the last 2 years. Are you willing to continue to serve?
Actually, Mr. Parrish did it this last year.
Oh, okay.
So it's an informative board to be on, especially when folks ask questions about the expense and has it saved the county money or not. It is not overly taxing, so I don't think, I would like to see someone else that hasn't been on that board.
How many times a year does?
Every other month. It's in the afternoon, though, 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
I'll nominate Mr. Carney.
Any other nominations for the Regional Jail Board, Authority Board? Last call for nominations. Hearing none, I'll close nominations. Mr. Carney, congratulations.
You're going to jail.
Acclamation. Going to jail. See you there.
You do get a tour. Luckily, they let you out.
Yeah, tour is great.
Going to visit the jail. That's the important word to always include, visit.
Right.
Next is the board's representative to the Agricultural and Forestal Districts Advisory Committee. This body meets once or twice a year. Some years, other years it does not.
Is it typically in tandem with the planning commission?
They meet generally just before the planning commission meeting.
So I would make a nomination of Mr. Whitson if he's willing to serve.
I'd be happy to do it. Mr. Frazier's been doing it historically, I think, for a few years, and I think there's a reasonable check and balance there since it's a separate review by that committee of forestal district renewals. So I'll nominate Mr. Frazier.
And I'll withdraw my nomination.
A nomination, Mr. Frazier by Mr. Whitson. Any other nominations?
Don't say none of the above, Mr. Frazier.
Hearing
Actually,
none.
I was gonna say I wouldn't serve unless you doubled my salary.
Well, we're making up our own rules, so let's go ahead and make that.
By acclamation, Mr. Frazier will earn a new salary of $0.
Let's double that.
Next is the board's representative to the Rappahannock County Recreational Facilities Authority, RCRFA.
I'm just going to tell you all up front that I've been happy to serve twice on this authority. It has the same meeting times as the Water and Sewer Authority that serves my district, which I find to be a difficult compromise. Folks often want me to attend those meetings. So if I could not serve this year, that would be great. It is a wonderful group and a very robust organization. They do a lot of positive things, and if anybody hasn't had an opportunity to serve and would be interested, I think it's a great group.
I'd nominate Mr. Carney.
All right, well,
It's Donna Hay. Any other nominations? This is your opportunity to start nominating people.
I know, clearly. How often does this?
One meeting a month at 5:30 in that evening. I think
Thursday.
Third Thursday. Second Thursday. Sorry.
it's especially suitable for local representatives with small children, right?
Good call. Good call.
Any other nominations for representative on RCRFA? Hearing none, I'll close those nominations, and by acclamation, Mr. Carney is your representative. You'll be learning a lot this year, sir. Next is the board's representative to the Rappahannock County Local Board of Social Services. As I discussed with the board in the past, the Code of Virginia suggests the board member be appointed, but does not require it. There is a currently vacant seat from Mr. Parrish serving as the board rep. If the Board of Supervisors chooses not to select one of your own to sit on this body, I would recommend that you select a citizen at your next meeting to fill out a multi-year term.
I'd be inclined to do that. We had this discussion in the fall where we had this embarrassment of riches with all these highly qualified subject matter experts who applied for positions on the Social Services Board. So it would be my thought here that we pass over this item in the resolution and that we address it via a citizen appointment in February.
I can, at the meeting when Mr. Beepout was appointed, Ms. Dutiel was also under consideration, and she pulled herself out of the race knowing that Mr. Beepout was interested. She has stated that she is still interested, if that changes any board member's mind.
I would just say the one function of this board that I would think might make it wise for us to have a representative of this board is that it is an organization whose budget can expand quickly. And so to have a supervisor present might be a good thing to do. I guess I'm saying I'm willing to serve if you all want to put someone on, and if we should want to just appoint a citizen later, that would be fine too.
The pleasure of the board. there's a nomination, we will go through the process. If there are no nominations, then I suppose that's speaking that you'll want to move this to next month and consider it then.
And what's the schedule for the meetings?
Remind me, Scale.
The third Wednesday of each month at 4:30, and the meetings go approximately 2 hours unless there's something that needs further work.
2 hours is nothing.
I do not that
If there's an extra, either a board member or a citizen that wants to attend, there's no,
Well, the portions of the meeting are open to the public and portions are closed meetings, so you would probably not be invited to attend.
I see. So up until, at some point last year, and time has blended together and then some, we made the decision to expand the number of seats from 3 to 5, if I remember
Yes.
correctly. And-
So a group of 3 is, one, problematic from a FOIA. 2 of the members can't really get together and talk about business. And from a information retention process, as people cycle off, because you can only serve 2 terms, you lose that institutional knowledge quickly. With a bigger body, it's a little bit more helpful to do that, so.
And it was only at the time that we expanded to 5 seats that we had a Board of Supervisors representative on the Social Services Board, correct?
I had recommended previously that you might want to consider it on a body of 3, but
And is there any operative language in the state code that describes what we ought to do, or, I mean, there's no requirement that we have a Board of Supervisors representative?
no, I believe the language is something like, one of the members, I don't know if the word shall is there, be a member of the Board of Supervisors unless the board chooses not to do that.
Mr. Goff, is that something that you can pull up quickly?
I can come back to them, look and see if I can get my hands on it.
Okay, sorry.
We can set this aside till next month if it pleases the board.
And there is no timing. The issue would just be you won't have that 5th representative on the body. Thanks. Yep.
This month,
Okay,
Which is still one more than you used to have.
still in month.
yeah, let's think this through a bit.
That works. All right, we'll move on. If that's
Thank you.
the consensus of the body, it sounds like. The next item is your representative to the
Mr. Curry, sorry, going back to our earlier discussion about the BZA appointment to the Planning Commission, you noted that we're under a deadline in that context, but here you're saying we're not.
Yeah, your local ordinance identifies the date when this board will select and appoint the members of the Board of Supervisors and the BZA to the Planning Commission.
I see.
In Chapter 170. There's a local ordinance. These are not controlled by any local ordinance, other than the number for social services. It doesn't say when that appointment will be made.
Okay, I knew you had it right, but I wanted to know why you were right. Thank you.
Sometimes just luck.
Okay.
The next body is the Rappahannock County Community Policy Management Team, CPMT. This body administers the Children's Services Act. County Administrator also serves on CPMT. Open the floor to nominations for a representative to CPMT. I think Mr. Parrish was most recently serving on this body. This is the $1.3 million budget line in your annual budget, and this body is in place to ensure that those funds are spent wisely, to make sure that we're making the most out of our cost share with the state.
And what's the meeting schedules for these?
Thursday of the month at 1:30. And they also go about 2 hours.
I could handle that.
Okay. I'll nominate Ms. Smith.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just trying to
I know.
catch the
We
right.
gotta keep an eye on this money.
Right.
Any
No,
other
it's-
nominations for CPMT? All right. Hearing none, I'll close nominations, and Ms. Smith, you'll
Thank
be
you.
appointed by acclamation. Okay, next are 2 representatives to the Rules Committee. The 2 board members serve are the only representatives on the Rules Committee, and the board is also select an alternate. This was set by forming charter resolution a couple years back. So be able to, you can nominate 2 representatives and an alternate.
I would nominate Ms. Donahue and Mr. Carney.
One question I had about this, and you and Mr. Fraser know best, is there, with the Rules Committee, would there be an opportunity to just bring that into our monthly agenda instead of having it separate? I don't know how.
Well, I think we talked about this when we formed the Rules Committee, and that, you know, we certainly don't meet every month, but if there's something that requires more fleshing out than we maybe want to take on in the course of a meeting as a body of 5, it gives us a place to refer those items so that they can be fleshed out by 2 board members, knowing that if 2 board members work through it, you really only need a third, or can, you know, seek feedback from the other 3 at the next meeting. So that's really the purpose, is to, you know, sort of have a breakout group to flesh out rules or procedural questions, resolutions that we as a body may be working on.
And what's the issue with 2?
It can be problematic in that those 2 members of the Board of Supervisors shouldn't be talking to each other about matters of ordinance or procedure
rules.
policy, which is, it really constrains those two members to have side meetings. You theoretically couldn't talk about ordinances.
Resolutions, none
Yeah.
of those things.
Yeah, that's.
Actually, you wouldn't be able to talk about something that was being considered by them. I don't, if it hasn't been, I mean, I'm sorry to just interject, that's the way my mind works, I'm sorry. If something hasn't been sent to the Rules Committee for consideration, then they would have no more or no less inability to speak about an ordinance or a resolution that hasn't been either presented to them or presented to the board. Only something that's been given to them to consider for further, you know, work would be the topic that they would be limited to discussion on.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the forming resolution requires matters to be referred by the Board of Supervisors or not, but that would certainly be the threshold gate.
Is there any reason why we couldn't set this one aside today?
None.
And then let's talk in February about how we might restructure this. Because, I mean, it sounds like we're all saying the same thing, which is this creates potentially more problems than.
No, I didn't say that at all.
Okay.
It sounds like we're trying to create a problem again. No 2 supervisors would be limited to discuss anything that's not already before them as members of the Rules Committee. Once the board majority sends something to the Rules Committee, whatever the makeup of that committee is, then those 2 members might be limited to their discussion outside of a Rules Committee meeting, but they certainly wouldn't be prior to that. So no 2 supervisors would be limited to a discussion of a resolution or a ordinance change that has not officially already been sent to them, I believe. I don't see how they could be.
How often did you meet this past year?
For quite a bit of the year, we met once a month, but we did not meet in November or December. And we probably could have met less frequently, but Mr. Fraser and I are also on the building committee, so we just had standing meetings for both back to back.
How about, could we wait and clarify this so that we can confirm what Mr. Fraser's saying? I would rather not be on a.
And ultimately, the board could, if the forming resolution doesn't say that the Rules Committee can only act and discuss matters that were formally referred to them by the Board of Supervisors, it could say that. And the board at your next meeting could modify that resolution to say that, and it would resolve that issue.
Let's table
do that.
this. Thank you.
Is that consensus?
Sounds reasonable.
Excuse me.
Last committee is the Building Committee, and you have 2 representatives on this body, and there are several citizens, a minimum of believe it's a minimum of 2 citizens, you now have 3 citizens to ensure that quorum is at least 3. So if you want to make a nomination, you can nominate
I'll
2
nominate
individuals.
Mr. Frazier and Ms. Smith. Thanks for your work today.
Any other nominations for the building committee?
I'm happy to serve.
Thank you.
Hearing no other nominations, I'll close nominations, and Mr. Frazier and Ms. Smith will serve acclamation.
Mr. Curry, I will put forward a motion that we adopt our organizational meeting resolution of the Board of Supervisors to incorporate the nominations, primary nominations, and any alternates agreed upon prior to this point in the meeting.
And just to be clear, it does not include
Thank you.
Section 12, Social Services, or Section 14, Rules Committee, which will be handled at your next meeting.
I'll modify my motion to note the omission of items 12 and 14 from the resolution that we're now voting to adopt.
A second.
I'll second that motion.
We'll roll call vote. I'll go ahead and call Mr. Carney,
Aye.
Ms. Donahue,
Aye.
Mr. Frazier,
Aye.
Ms. Smith,
Aye.
Mr. Whitson.
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, it would be wonderful if you would take over the rest of the meeting.
Nice job, sir. Thank you. Next, we have the adoption of the agenda.
Madam Chair, I'll put forward a motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
Second?
We have a motion and a second.
So we'll make sure you are aware that there is an addendum item. I don't think you need to call it out because it is in the documents before you. It is just a report out on the winter storm.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. Next, we have Dr. Grimsley, School Superintendent Report.
Happy New Year. We're off to a very interesting start already. Anyone else part of the No Electricity Club right now? Oh, to be superintendent and feel so powerless. Oh, gosh. Well, at RCPS, we are doing our best to gear up for another successful semester with students returning. Well, they were supposed to return today, but winter sort of disrupted things. So we're hoping to bring back everybody tomorrow. Teachers are in the building on campus today, getting ready and preparing the classrooms. We are awaiting some sector-specific guidance from the Department of Health based on everything going on with the Omicron variant and the CDC changes. But currently, there are no changes to our mitigation protocols as we return. But as we develop those and communicate those, we'll make sure everybody's aware. And we have a school board meeting next week to be sure that we get those out. Prior to the break, RCHS completed fall SOL testing. The preliminary testing data certainly suggests that while we're not at pre-pandemic levels just yet, our students have outpaced the expectations of achievement sent from Richmond on where students should perform on average at this point in time. Our math department truly stood out with pass rates close to 90% and one teacher even achieving a 100% pass rate. I could not be more proud of our dedicated, competent staff achieving such results amidst such a challenging educational landscape. The semester ended on a positive note with students and staff participating in fun outdoor activities, ugly holiday sweater contests, spirit weeks, and even a faculty versus student volleyball game. Morale was very high leaving our buildings for winter break. Over the break, athletic contests still continued, as did other extracurricular activities. Our FFA agriculture students led a very successful Adopt a Family event while over break. With the help of our generous community, the FFA chapter was able to raise enough funding to provide 14 children and their families a joyous Christmas with much-needed necessities. The FFA students learned so much about the joy of giving and helping others in need. They hope to continue this program and even expand it into as the years go on, as one of their major service projects. We now have a preliminary budget released by outgoing Governor Ralph Northam. We are using this budget to begin development of our proposed FY23 school budget, which will be discussed in public according to the Budget Development Adoption Cycle calendar. We look forward to working with all of you and the county administration and the joint boards on developing a sensible yet innovative budget that will continue to support a best-in-class school system. As always, we thank you so much for your continued advocacy and support. Do you have any questions for me?
New year, wondering if you could just give us your best and accurate guess on enrollment in the public schools. And I believe you measure it using an FTE unit of measure or some form. So if you could just give us a number and,
Sure.
and tell us how you arrive at that number as of January 1.
So for budget purposes, for next year, we are proposing a average daily membership of 745.
That's the number I was looking for, average daily membership. Okay. And what does that mean?
745 students through pre-K through 12.
And how is that measured?
It's based on our current enrollment and trends, and then what we anticipate might come for next year.
Okay, so it's
For state revenue projections, really.
Okay. Okay, great. And then, I just wonder, going into the new year, is there any, from a curriculum standpoint, has there been any discussion about, introducing any kind of, experiential learning into the curriculum? I know you've done great things with, agriculture and the FFA. And I've said it before, with the Shenandoah National Park in our backyard, it just occurs to me that that's a huge opportunity. And I wonder if there is any contemplated initiative or effort that might involve experiential learning within the park.
Absolutely. Experiential learning is a big part of what we adopt into the curriculum as much as possible and integrate. Currently, we use, actually one of our teachers, before she retired, created a creative writing Shenandoah National Park-based curriculum that we use at the high school. So we are very familiar and do utilize their resources. We also do the Junior Ranger program with some of our elementary students. But any way we can expand that, we're always looking for more opportunities for hands-on learning. And also expanding the high school academy models, which are working really, really well. So currently we have the Agriculture Academy, Health Science Academy, and now we are exploring the Fine Arts Academy possibility, which we discussed several years ago, and now it's coming to fruition now that we have Henry Mason aboard as our performing arts facilitator.
Great.
Yes.
Thanks a lot.
I see you all are hiring. Yeah, are you having any staffing issues? I know we hear about larger localities having staffing issues. And I was just wondering if you could talk about the employees that you're looking for and if you're having any problems.
Absolutely. So we are much better off than most, filling almost all of our vacancies. We do have a couple of mid-year vacancies that have popped up, so we need a social worker right now very badly. That would be great. Also, substitute teachers. We're always looking for substitute teachers and substitute drivers, cafeteria workers. Those applications are on the website. And also telepresenter for our Valley Health Wellness Clinic. So that's a brand new one that we're shifting how that wellness center model will work. So we do have applicants already applying for that, so hopefully they'll be filled very shortly. Good question.
Is there going to be school tomorrow? You don't have to answer
Yes,
that.
there is, of course. We do plan to start on time, I will tell you. I just got my,
Spoiler alert.
it's okay, spoiler alert. You're coming to school if we have heat and our roofs are clear. You know, we're good.
Friday's a different question.
Friday, I don't even want to think about.
Thank you, Shannon.
Absolutely.
Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.
Thank you.
All right, next we have the public comment period. At this time, I'll open the courtroom to public comment. If you would wish to speak, please come up to the mic, give us your name and your district, and we look forward to hearing from you. Yes, ma'am.
Anita Ramos, Hampton District. I do this the first of every year. First of all, I want to welcome our new member on the board and wish him lots of luck. And it sounds like a very educational year you're going to look forward to, sir. I'd like to thank all the people that are in this room who have worked for our federal government in any way, shape, or form. And if they would stand up, please. If any of you work for the government as a service member, as a contractor, as a civilian, I'd like to honor you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, even especially those who are retired. You all, I know, have gone the extra mile to take care of our country, and I appreciate it, and all of us should appreciate how lucky we are to have had such wonderful people working for our government and taking care of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak? Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, Deke Deacon, Stonewall Hawthorne District. I also want to congratulate Mr. Carney on his victory and welcome to the board. But I'm going to make an observation. This Mutual Admiration Society of Ms. Donahue, Mr. Carney now, Mr. Whitson, has resulted in a overwhelming majority of votes in a 3-2 margin. Ms. Smith, Mr. Frazier, in the minority. And I'm going to challenge Mr. Carney to break away from that and give us, especially in the Stonewall Hawthorne District, some adequate representation. And I think the first step is to abstain from the vote on the boundary line. Regardless of where your lease is signed, you're still on property owned by the person who will benefit from this. So I'm going to challenge you to do that. Secondly, I'm going to challenge this board also to honor the commitment that your predecessor gave to me in front of this board, in front of this audience, of no tax dollars, no county tax dollars in the broadband initiative. So thirdly, as I've stated several times, in opposition to the boundary line adjustment, I see no real benefit to the county other than providing a few jobs. This is not going to be, this is opening up the door to the type of development that we all ran away from. So the challenge is there. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Sheila Gressinger, Hampton District. First of all, of course, Happy New Year. I do have a piece of what I think is some good news. I was at the co-op last week and I talked to a friend of mine who told me that he watches the Board of Supervisors videos to keep up with what's going on in the county. And I think that is tremendous information for us to take forward. A little bit of history, several years ago. I mean, a lot of people say, oh, the Board of Supervisors don't listen to what we say. Okay. Quite a while ago, there was only one Board of Supervisors meeting every month. It was at 2 o'clock. And a lot of people gave input that they couldn't be there. There was no video going on or anything. So the Board of Supervisors split it to a 2 o'clock and a 7 o'clock. And then they also, after a little bit later, they tried to do a quarterly one in the evenings of the Board of Supervisors. They did 2 of them. One was at the Flint Hill Fire and Rescue, and one was at Castleton. And then stuff got in the way and they weren't able to do it. And then there was a very enterprising young woman, Caitlin Struckman, I believe, took it upon herself to start to video the Board of Supervisors meetings. She did have some support. Ben Jones was one, Foothills Forum was another who contributed to her supply, and she did that faithfully for quite a while. And then we were able to get the video, Rappahannock News, and then before the Mad Rap, the other organization did it as well. So we do have people who are paying attention who actually can't be here, and I just think that's marvelous. Then we're going to go on to, I wanted to address the broadband. A lot of people are talking about it. In the December 16th issue on page 12, there was a map, and it showed what's existing now is just the little itty-bitty white part, and then they have a part that Chantel is proposing, and then all the rest is the other area of what's needed. Now, I live on 522, and years ago, Adelphia put their cable through, and caused a minimum of disruption to the area. They laid cable, so I have internet, and I've been very happy with it. It's now Comcast. What we had in the newspaper a little while ago was somebody saying, well, we have Piedmont Broadband, and we also have Starlink. Those are opportunities. However, I think they depend on line of sight. So trees need to be trimmed, or who knows how many trees even have to be taken down in the initial installation. So when you look at all the area that's going to be under review for All Points Broadband, how many of those are nooks and crannies? How many trees are going to have to be taken down, causing destruction, or a lot of branches are going to have to be taken away for that line of sight? So those are things to consider. The other thing, we know broadband is very important from a school point of view, from safety point of view, and from the telehealth point of view. And then another thing I wanted to bring up was that for people who say, I don't want it, it'll never happen, please think about your own property, that when you go to sell it, that is an asset to have internet. And the thing that we've heard recently from some of our realtors is that the trend is now turning, a little tide is turning, that there are families who are looking to be coming out here, which is a plus. We need the younger generation to be coming on. Lastly, I'm going to talk about our boundary adjustment. I think a lot of people have not read our comprehensive plan, and I put this in one of my letters to the editor. On page 91, our comprehensive plan says, consider the planning goals, principles, and policies of the town of Washington, and where feasible, undertake joint or coordinate action with the town government and independent county authorities. So it seems to me something that we are looking at our comprehensive plan to have growth be in and around the villages, and this is something that is an appropriate action. Years ago, when John McCarthy was the county administrator, he did say that there was going to come a time when people were going to have to start to think about the boundaries of the town of Washington, because there's only a certain amount of growth that's going to be available with building lots and things like that. So, and they were talking about how they were going to accomplish that. Not necessarily, I'm not going to put words in the mouth of Mr. McCarthy, but people had been talking about, gosh, how can we do that? So I think this is an appropriate opportunity where the growth that we need is going to be something that we can accomplish. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? No one in the courtroom. I do see we have at least a couple of people on Zoom. If anyone on Zoom wishes to speak during public comment, please raise your Zoom hand to be recognized. Not seeing any, I will close public comment. Moving on to the consent agenda.
Madam Chair, for procedural reasons, I would like to remove the minutes for adoption from the consent agenda, please.
Okay.
So we can vote on those separately. It occurs to me, and I believe this happened last year, Mr. Carney wasn't a member of our board for the meetings that the minutes reflect, so I think it's best that he not be voting on them.
Anything else in the consent agenda? All right, I'll entertain a motion to approve minus the minutes.
I will put forward a motion that we adopt the consent agenda after removing the minutes.
I'll second that motion.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Madam Chair, I put forward a motion.
Oh, so I'm sorry. Did you,
Did Mr. Frazier get his eye
didn't
in?
hear Mr. Frazier. He's muted right now.
Sorry, I also, sorry about that.
Thank you.
Bye.
Madam Chair, I put forward a motion that we adopt the meeting minutes that were included in the consent agenda and removed.
A motion,
Second.
Smith, second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Carney abstains.
Make sure you use your mic, so.
Thank you. All right, appointments to Board of Building Appeals. Have we,
This is a standing item. I do not have an application. There is one vacancy available for individuals if they want to sit on the local Board of Building Appeals. Please reach out to myself or your board representative, and we will get you appointed towards the application. Similarly, with the Agricultural Forestal Districts Advisory Committee, there's one vacancy on that body. Prerequisite is to be a landowner. So I do not have any applications at this time.
Just remove this. You're just gonna remove this.
all right, thank you for that. Moving into old business, water resource protection and monitoring.
This was an item that was asked to be on each board meeting agenda. I don't believe there's anything new at this time for this item.
Mr. Curry, we did receive a referral from Mr. Henry, who sits on the County Planning Commission, regarding an intern with GIS background. And I know you and I had a brief exchange regarding the possibility of enlisting that intern, maybe to do some of the well-related data infrastructure
I could
development.
potentially gather information from the health department and aggregate it in a way that is geo-referenced and could provide some information.
Yeah, I wonder if we ought to reach out to him. Hopefully it's not too late. I think that came just before the holidays.
I think it would be great. I know we have a lot of pressing things that we are working on, including broadband. But a month like December, which up until this event we've had this week, we only had 6/100ths of an inch of rain, I think, and we didn't have, I think, much rainfall at all in November, aside from Election Day, of course. So, you know, it's one of those things that it's not going to be a problem until it's a problem, and I think we should work on it.
Could we, maybe we could do two things. One, if you could reach out to that individual to see if they'd be interested in working with a fine county like ours on an internship basis, maybe just move forward on the well data review. And then second, how long ago did we see this water study? It was sort of like it was evaluation of the county water table, et cetera. I don't know if we could get a refresh from someone who knows something about that.
It's been some time, certainly can. The county needs to prepare a water supply plan and review it every 5 years. So I think that's coming up in another 2 years or so.
I do have a relationship with Vincent Day through the tavern. I know he has studied this in the past. If we'd be interested in having him come speak to or take questions from the board, we could do that
That'd be
as well.
great. I think we need to chew on something here.
Yeah.
If
But
he-
if it's 2 years away, that means we really need to probably start working on it sooner than later. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No,
you.
no
Sorry,
problem,
Mr.
no
Rhodes.
problem.
All right, so you'll get with the intern and I'll reach out to Mr. Day.
Yeah, Mr. Kerr, I'd be happy to reach out to that person also if it's easier for you.
Yeah, I'm not sure how the logistics of that would work, since we don't really have a GIS platform for them to work on. It might be a partnership with Mr. Monty's group. If we had the services of an intern, then maybe we could coordinate somehow if they know GIS.
So now we have two things to talk about. That'd be great. Good,
Thank you.
thanks.
Thank you, Patrick.
All right, nothing more on water resources. We'll move into the building committee progress report. Who's going to?
Not sure who, I know there's a presentation attached. I think Mr. Glennie was prepared to, Mr. Waters.
Mr. Kerr, I noted that the meeting was noticed as a joint meeting of the Board of Supervisors and Building Committee. Does the Building Committee need to convene formally in order to honor that joint meeting description?
The fact that it's noticed allows them to be here and discuss it. If they want it to convene, I suppose they could, but there's really no action for the building
Okay.
committee to take, and their advisory to the board, it's really a
Okay,
belt and
I just want to
suspenders
make sure
sort
we
of thing.
were squared away there. Thanks.
Because we have all members of the building committee representative here and at home.
Okay, thank you. Well, the building committee has made a lot of progress. We've gotten, thanks to your funding, we've gotten a lot of things done. And we just wanted to bring you up to speed. And we're getting to the point where we need some feedback or some thoughts on guidance. And don't expect that today. Our objective today is to set up a work session where we can sit down and go through a lot of details. All right, but I wanted to bring you up to speed. First part is, we have a lot now of organic experience on the planning committee as well as contractors. Mr. Waters, for example, brings a wealth of historical restoration, preservation experience. Right? So we're very well staffed. All right. What we've learned. All right. I will go through the space needs in a little bit more detail on the next slide, but you can see that the basic numbers for the judicial facilities and the county administration. ADA access and single egress issues. Not to say that we're in violation of anything, but it sure could be better, all right? The roof study that you funded found that the jail, courthouse, and the old admin building roofs had 0 to 1 year remaining life. In other words, they're ready to go right now. Visitor Center and the Commonwealth Attorney, it was 2 to 4 years, all right? And they gave estimates for those, and we'll talk about that a little bit more today. The masonry study that we've all been, and thank you for funding that as well, that we've all been waiting for, found many of the same things, that significant water infiltration into the Treasurers and Commonwealth Commissioner of Revenue buildings is permanent. Previous repairs did not last long and probably actually made some of the problems worse. They recommended repointing 100% of the Treasurer and Commissioner of Revenue building, repointing 25% of the courthouse, improving gutters and downspouts, removing the concrete barging, improve the water drainage around the buildings, particularly the sidewalks were right up in it, and there's 3 downspouts that drain right by the building, all right? We did not investigate, that study did not investigate the jail or the clerk's office. The jail chimneys appear to be a life and safety issue, the 2 older ones. You can't see any mortar, and we are concerned that...
4 older ones.
Well, 4, okay, 4 chimneys, sorry. But concerned that they could come down in heavy winds or something. So that's an immediate concern. The clerk's office right here is missing caps on the parapets and on the chimneys. We started doing some architectural concepts. I'm not going to show them today, but that's for the work session. But again, I want to emphasize they're just concepts to get ideas for different parts. All right, we're not proposing anything yet. Next slide on the space needs. If you haven't seen this, you can see what the existing space requirements are. A couple things I want to point out is if you just go those first 2 lines of the court facilities, you will see that just to replace the functions, well, when we have to redo the court, we have to bring it up to current standards. Do that for just the functions in this building alone requires 2.5, almost 3,000 more square feet because of the new requirements. So one of the issues is it staying here, are you adding on, what are you doing? Or do you even want to have court in the county anymore? On the right side, you will see that there's a number where they group things. The architect did that to say, if you put all those functions together, that's roughly the size of the space. All right. He did the same thing for county administration. And for those people that are quick on the math, you'll notice that the 10,000 is way off of the numbers on the left. That's because the Board of Supervisors meeting room is not included in the part on the left, nor is all those buildings are separate now. And so passageways in between them, the functions aren't there. So those are the big things that take it up to 10,000, all right? Another point is you will see that the Treasurer's Office Commissioner of Revenue and Registrar's Office both exceed the space in their existing buildings, all right? And we need to address those issues, as well as, you'll see that the Extension Office had a pretty large increase under its request, and kind of surprising that the sheriff didn't ask for anything more. So what the building committee hasn't done is sit down with these stakeholders yet and review their requirements and go through them. So for example, for the treasurer's office or those three, what is in their requirements that could be located, not co-located right in the same building? Like, could storage be in a different building? All right. And one last point I would make is, if you're looking at existing, at the end, if you eliminate just the lease space, we have enough space here to house everything from a square footage standpoint. Even if we take out the second floor of the courthouse, we still have enough, all right? So, because that's something we've talked about, taking back the original configuration, all right? If you're building a new courthouse somewhere else, if you take judicial off and build it somewhere else, you'll see that the 23 is larger than the 20, right? And the other point that you'll see down here at the bottom in real small print is the library. There's some discussion of a swap there. We don't need that much space. We don't need 4,800 square marker, but it's not an option that's off the table, so to speak. All right. I'd like to turn it over to Dale to talk about the next slide.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Paige asked me to address these items. We have a lot of things going wrong, and we're trying to fix things. For instance, the roof on the jailhouse. There's been a lot of discussion. We've done some inspections. We have money to fix it, and what I'm thinking, maybe it would be better to slow down a little bit, because there's also problems with the soffit. There's problems with the gutters. There's problems with the chimneys, and it's pretty bad. And if we do it and plan it carefully, we can save a lot of money. I think it's a more organized approach, and plan things out so that you're not constantly fighting these battles that you'll never get ahead of. It'd be 50 years from now, you'll still be chasing these things. There's a tendency to use incompatible materials on a lot of these projects. If you change the porosity of the mortar just 1%, you can destroy a brick. A historic brick is very soft. So they tend to use the wrong materials. They tend to use the wrong methods on a lot of these projects, I see. And I've seen it, I see this everywhere. If we use the wrong methods, like positioning the gutters, we dump water onto the walls, and that erodes the walls. The water falls and hits the sidewalk, it splashes up on the brick and destroys the brick. We have a lot of that problem around these buildings. We also have a big problem with parge coatings. It's very destructive. And there's a big problem with adjacent concrete sidewalks that hold water close to buildings. So if we can do some things a little different, I think we'll save a lot of money. That's it.
Oh, wow. That is a big picture.
So what we did is, we sat down and tried to lay out the tasks that were in front of us, and we're not saying that this is all of them. And then we tried to make all the connections between them of what depends on what, right? So if you get the impression that this is complex and there's spaghetti thrown up against the wall, you got the message, all right? So there's many interrelated tasks, and as Dale just said, coordinating them is critical. So for example, a real simple example, if you're going to scaffold the building to do something, you might as well do everything that's in front of that scaffolding at the same time. Or if you're going to do something about the sidewalks, you do that along with the other downspouts and things like that, for example. But I don't want to spend a lot of time. This is just an idea. Where we are right now, down in the lower left, that red area is the plan. That's really what is the big area that we need to work on. And that's what the joint work session would be about, is giving us, the building committee, the guidance or direction that we need to put that plan together for your approval. Next slide. So the issues that we see, you got space allocation, how do you want to do it? All right, that's a discussion item. Do you, and I'll talk about more in the last slide. All right. Also wanted to help you get around how big of a number we might be talking about. And I want to say, these are rough order of magnitude. I got it. Approximate signs in there, we don't know, it's going to change. But for example, the courthouse, we got an estimate of how much it is per square foot from the architect, and it's coming out with that type of number, all right? So just so you can start wrapping your head around where the money is going to come from. These are not budget level numbers yet, nowhere close, all right? But you need, when you think about options, you need to think about how much it's going to be, all right? The other point is because this is such a critical part of the community, and obviously there are budget implications, we strongly believe that public acceptance is essential. It needs to be early and frequent. And so we need to figure out how to do that, all right? Next slide on the way ahead. As I've said a couple times, we would like to have a joint session, discuss these. We can pull out all the diagrams and the pictures and the details and the estimates and go through them. Because of the status of those chimneys on the jail, and because it's not really as related as the other buildings, recommending that we probably think about starting that real soon, all right? Because it's not as tied up as some of these other buildings into the architectural concepts, all right? An overall, just general plan is to try and, after our work session, is try and come up with a comprehensive plan set of options in the next 6 to 9 months, and then take 3 to 6 months for you all to get public approval, finalize it, and get the details and start doing the contracting, things like that, okay? So you get an idea of some of the type of questions that we're going to talk about. Number one is affirm that the court functions remain in the county. We think that's a no-brainer, but we need to say that because, and then we're pretty much convinced that adding that much space to the back of this building is not a good idea because you're tearing into a very old structure. So you're that kind of locks you into a new courthouse building, however that is done. Then preservation of the buildings, all right? Which ones do you want to do? As I said, from the space, if you do all of these on this list, you have more than enough space, all right? But note, the old church is on that list because that's the only place where the expanded extension office fits, all right? But you have to rebuild that building or severely improve it, all right? So I was talking about, this is something for you all to think about before our session too. Architectural considerations. What do you want the look and feel? You know, on the committee, we had one option for building the building that made it look like we're pulling into a Holiday Inn. And we kind of nixed that within about 3 seconds. All right, what do you want the look to be like from Gay Street? Do you want it to kind of preserve the existing atmosphere that's here and the buildings and things like that? Do we want the campus concept? Do we want to get all your county functions here? It physically does fit. Do you want them all here in the campus location? And then the space out in front of the courthouse is a community gathering area. We assume you want to keep that as a place for the community to talk when you're not in a Board of Supervisors meeting getting public comment, right? Something like that. Function relocation. Again, assuming you want to eliminate or minimize lease space, right? Future, how do you want to use these historic buildings, particularly the courthouse? And there's a long-term versus short-term approach. As I tell my accountant father all the time, penny wise or dollar foolish, all right? So how do we want to approach that? And that gets back to the integrated hodgepodge approach. And then we need to think about not hard, fast concretes, but some time and funding constraints. Do you want to put, don't exceed this number or get it done by this date? Things like that. Give us a feel for it. It doesn't have to be hard dates, but just a feel for where you all think we need to go. All right, so we can lay out some options for you. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Paige.
Thank you,
Thank
Dave.
you.
Thanks for all your work.
Paige, before you sit down, do you want to let everybody know that's watching or listening in, the members of the building committee and their background? Because I think Mr. Waters, I know, has,
Myself, acquisition, engineering, architecture background. Dale, Waters, historic preservation, 40 years, I believe, doing this on some very important structures. Doug, general citizen, I don't know all of your stuff other than, I've seen you do construction fence at the, these guys, and, Ron, who's got electrical experience, and Ms. Smith.
thank you. I
Sure.
just thought we should make sure everybody knows who's on that committee.
I just had a couple of questions. So the remodeling number there, that was, and I know you said, these are not real numbers, but, okay. So, but let me ask you this, separately, you talked about, in order to upgrade this building to the point it could be used as a courthouse under current and evolving safety and other requirements, I believe you said it would have to be expanded by 3,000 square feet. Is that correct?
You're right, the existing functions that are here require 2.5, I think it's 2.5, about 2,500 square feet.
Okay, so my question is, within, recognizing that the $1 to $2 million remodeling number is not a hard number, does that, would that range for remodeling include expansion of this building or not?
We haven't looked at that option.
Okay.
You're ahead of us.
Well, yeah, I think it's an important question because I think a lot of people are,
If you did choose, my personal opinion, if you did choose to try and remain court functions in this building, that remodeling number is gonna be much larger, but of course you don't buy the new courthouse.
right, that's
Right?
what I was
So
trying to,
But the concern is, and I think I can speak for the committee in this, you start carrying into an old building like this, you don't know what you're gonna find. And it's concern, and then you have just basic ADA access issues to this floor that make it very difficult.
okay.
right?
You also lose functionality during the time of the renovation.
Oh, yeah, that's the other big problem. So
Yeah,
you have to
for sure.
temporarily move forward.
And then, on the chimneys, just given the current state of building trades these days, how, but at the same time, given the urgency that you've stated, you called it a life and safety issue, so we've heard that, and we can't disregard that. How difficult will it be to find a qualified contractor who understands the mortar to use, the techniques to use, to make sure that they don't make the chimneys worse? I mean, are we in a position where we could move quickly and find somebody qualified to do that work?
Quickly is a tough question.
Right,
Good people are backed up.
right,
It's not something I don't think is impossible, within 6 months.
Okay.
But there are places, if you look at this picture, there are places in this chimney that are in the process of collapsing. So,
where is that photo? I mean, what are,
That's in the attic.
it's in the attic.
I see,
Oh, by the way, do not go into the attic unless you are wearing a breathing advice and.
I have no reason to. Okay.
The bats and birds have been very busy.
And another big picture question, and then I'll stop. If we, and I know that we're potentially getting ahead of the discussion, but what would happen from a space utilization standpoint if we built a new building? What would happen to this building? Would we then have excess space? And would that then lead to a situation where we have essentially decorative buildings serving no practical purpose other than a museum for Rappahannock County?
Dale has spoken to this a couple times. You do not want to do that.
I don't want to do that
So,
for sure.
But you would, the most likely option is to put the Board of Supervisors meeting in here and have this as the meeting space. That's comes back to the community concept, you know, this is the community meeting,
I see.
all right?
Well, and some administrative functions can be served in this building too. Administrative functions?
Depending on what you do. If you leave the 2 floors, yes, you'll have plenty of space. If you leave both floors, you then can think about getting rid of some other buildings, like the Commonwealth Attorney's Building or something like that.
I mean, I think as a member of this committee, we're in a place where decisions need to be made or guidance needs to be given from this board to the building committee. I don't think we should be making assumptions. I think court functionality is very important to most people in Rappahannock County, but I don't know that you all feel the same way. So before we go proposing, digging into what we really need our future courthouse to look at, we want to make sure that that is a priority for all the members of the board. I believe that county administration should be in the courthouse row area for functionality of county government. I think a lot of people feel that way. I don't know that all my peers on the board feel that way. I know some of the buildings that we get hung up on, that we question what function they would serve versus the cost analysis on renovating them or making them more usable space. For example, the old administration building and the church.
Yeah.
Those are real sticking points because the church in particular is going to be an extensive renovation. And I think that it's money well spent if it gets us out of that rental we've been in for $5,000 a month for years. But I just want to make sure that all of my fellow board members feel the same way. We are at a point where we've done a lot of groundwork, and I think there are decisions and guidance that we need. And it's a good annual check-in as well, and I appreciate you making time on the agenda for it today.
What we really want to do, if I can interject, Ron Fraser here, I'm sorry, is that if we go ahead and can set up some sort of a work session, that would, be beneficial for all members, where we can actually discuss the presentation in some detail.
And the other thing, I know some of the building committee members have offered to meet one-on-one with board members if you wanted to see things or see the materials that we've reviewed. Certainly it is a lot to digest, and we're happy to meet with you if you want to take a tour and see some of the problems that we've found.
There were plenty of those.
When I signed up to be on the building committee, I knew that there were a lot of things to dig into, and there's no shortage of items to work on, for sure.
Trying to drive this forward. Is there a particular date for a joint meeting that was under consideration?
And I want to make sure the right people can be there. I don't know if we need somebody with construction, what kind of people, other than the building committee. Thank you very much for all your expertise, but there are folks you guys have been working with too, I think. So is there anybody else we need to have in that meeting? We need to look at dates.
We can probably get them there, but we have to have a date to work back to.
All right, let's give a date a try.
The 2 next Wednesdays, at least for me, from a planning commission standpoint, are a no-go, but I'm happy to meet any other time. And I'm worried about the jail.
Yep.
chimneys. We got to talk about that and make a decision, it sounds like.
But it wouldn't be as bad if they weren't so high up in here.
Right, right, yeah.
And the roof structure underneath is amazingly in good shape. And I would hate to have to replace any of that. I mean, it's got Roman numerals carved into the wood about how the pieces went together.
Wow.
So couldn't stand a good cleaning.
Yeah, good point.
Do we want to shoot for the 17th? Maybe after the 5:30?
What day of the week is, day of the week?
That's a Monday.
Might be good if you can see it in the daytime and walk around in the daytime.
That's true.
So we could do it. I don't know what your schedule is, Ms. Smith.
An afternoon meeting will typically work.
We thinking 2 hours? Do you have any idea?
At least, I probably won't be there on the 17th.
That won't work.
Can we have the chairs exchange notes and call a meeting?
Okay by me.
Mr. Frazier has been the chair of the building.
Mr. Frazier, are you acceptable to the idea of having you and I come up with a date and then share them with our two different boards, committee and board?
We might, if we're wanting consultants to possibly be
Attend.
available as well, then we'll want to check on their availability too.
Yep. But it sounds like
Yeah, we could probably iron that out, yes.
daylight does make sense, I think. And so if anybody's got work schedules that are particular days of the week that we want to avoid, please let me know. All right, Mr. Frazier, let's attempt to have a date by Wednesday.
Wednesday of next week?
You and I can discuss on Wednesday, today is Wednesday. Let's try Friday. Can you and I have a phone call Friday afternoon?
Yeah, earlier today would be better, but we can exchange emails.
Okay.
Get set up.
All right, so we'll attempt to have a date determined with both the building committee and the board by Friday. We'll let everybody know.
Sounds good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for all the time you're putting into this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, moving into new business, we have Patrick Monty here with the Rappahannock Rapidan Regional Commission. And I can say that because I've been attending the meetings for a year now. If you'd like to come up, sir, and talk to us about 2020 census redistricting.
Madam Chair, members of the board, thank you very much. I know included on board docs for you are 4 options that Matthew Decatur, who's our GIS person at our office, and I sort of went through to give you some preliminary options for local redistricting. We did advise county administrator and then others that we were working with in the region to sort of wait until the state went through their process. We tracked the redistricting commission at the state and then went to the Supreme Court. And as I imagine many of you know, that the Supreme Court did adopt their final maps last week. Rappahannock County is not split for congressional, state senate, or House of Delegate districts, so that makes our job a little bit easier in terms of the options that you have. The 4 options that are before you, 2 of them are what we would call a least change option. That is designed to work from the existing districts and make as few changes as possible in terms to meet the ideal district population. That, as previously discussed, I don't remember which board meeting it was, but Wakefield has a population that's too high as of the 2020 census and does need to lose some population. Its neighboring districts are Hampton and Jackson. So the least change options, which are option A and option B, move 1 census block from Wakefield district. You have an option there of moving it to either Jackson or Hampton. That would result in a plan based on population that would meet the plus or minus 5% population deviation for the districts. We also are producing for option C and option D, 2 plans which strive to get as close to equal population amongst the districts as possible. As you kind of see, there's some similarities between the 2 of them. What I would say here is we work predominantly off of, again, trying to get as close to 0 deviation as possible. Just because of what I mentioned earlier about Wakefield district needing to lose population, that's sort of where we started from in terms of trying to get Wakefield as close to 0 as possible. So they both have the same proposed changes in terms of what Wakefield would lose to Jackson district. And then there's some subsequent changes in between Hampton and Piedmont in one instance, and then between Hampton and Stonewall Hawthorne, as well as Jackson and Stonewall Hawthorne for those. All of these would meet the plus or minus 5% requirement. I think as the memo from the county administrator says, there's no requirement for the board to accept any of these, and we are prepared to go through the process, move census blocks between them either today or at a future work session of the board if the board so desires.
Thanks a lot for your work on this. If you could just let us know within your GIS data set, how are you able to nail down with this level of specificity the number of individuals in households to allow you to hit these population numbers? I understand you can identify households, but within those households.
So the data that's used comes from the census. It's their PL 94-171 data, which is specifically for redistricting. And that gets down to where they have what they call their census block, which is their lowest level of geography. And so a census block, if you're in the town of Washington, you have a block that is like what we would consider a normal town or city block, which is bounded by 4 streets. Into the county, you get census blocks which typically will follow roads or streams or other water features are the most common. So what we have in the process that the state used and that other localities would use is to take those census blocks and then you can move them between districts and until you get a population figure that meets that plus or minus 5%.
Okay.
That's the process, the way it's been done, and again, the way the state did theirs when they worked originally from large congressional districts down to the delegates districts. So it's not so much households as it is total population based on the 2020 census.
I got it. All right. And kind of I think it's probably a truly dumb question, but I have to ask it. To what extent, when you look at polygon shapes for this type of mapping, I mean, the existing voting district map is pretty uniform in terms of how lines are drawn. And I know during the last election cycle, there was some confusion about who was in and who was out. Is it a fair assumption that just from a ease of administration, from a voter registrar perspective, that you would want sort of non-irregular, sort of patched together polygons for each voting district? I mean,
if you're referring to the way that the districts look in terms of compactness or I think that's important. I would say that it's more important in terms of the boundaries you follow. There are a lot of instances, and I'm struggling to think of one for Rappahannock specifically, but where the census block geography will follow. Say you have a road that comes off of a secondary road, a 600 level road, and you've got a road that dead ends somewhere. A lot of times census block geography will follow that road and then sort of have to continue on until it comes to another point where it's going to stop. So in the instances that we've presented the 4 here, what Matthew did was follow name streams or roads as the boundary. So if we had a census block that had one of those instances where it followed potentially a farm road or another water feature that didn't have a name that we could reference in a future ordinance description, we would use the census blocks that gave us the ability to sort of identify clearly for not only the board but also the public and the voting public.
yeah, I mean, for whatever it's worth, it seems that option A, the way it's mapped is more elegant than any of the others. It just looks like a natural layout for our county. Okay, thanks. That's all I have.
Ultimately, as I noted in the board packet, the process for you will be to adopt revised ordinances that set the districts. And as you're aware, when you adopt an ordinance, it's a public hearing process. These ordinances are very detailed because they do include that very carefully worded description of the streams and the roads and passing from this spot to that spot, on and on and on, and you get a paragraph of boundary descriptions. So what will have to happen at some point in time is the board will should coalesce on a proposal that then staff can work with the commission to an attorney to draft into words for that ordinance, and then that ordinance will be placed before the public in a public hearing, and then you could adopt those. How much work you want to do between now and then is the big question right now.
Yeah. I mean, to keep this moving along, if we were to authorize staff to work toward a public hearing, would such a motion have to include our consensus or our recommendation regarding which option we wish to pursue, or is the public hearing in fact one that would consider all of the proposed options?
Well, I would not suggest you have a public hearing with all the options. I think you could have a public hearing with options. you would have to put before the public that ordinance with that detailed language for any option that you're considering. If one of these four options is satisfactory, or two, maybe option A and B, if you weren't sure which you wanted to split that one chunk off to Hampton or to Jackson. Jackson would then have more population, would be on the high end of population if you look at that. If you did A, they would be at 4.27% above the optimal, which is fine. It might just put you in a spot where you're changing in another 10 years, and that's not a big deal. I guess it's a long way of saying it would be best not to have four options that we have to draft, and particularly if the board can steer towards A or B and not C or D, or C and D and not A and B. C and D is going to take a lot of work to pull those ordinances together because there's a lot of changes.
Yeah,
I have to agree with Mr. Whitson that option A, from an impact to the citizens, seems to be the least painful. And the numbers add up the way we need them to, so I would support option A as well.
I would like to see us move forward with both options A and B. Just thinking logically, the two districts that are most likely to have changes are, of course, Wakefield, and I believe with the increased growth right outside of Jackson District, that's also the area that we're most likely to see some increases in population. So long-term, it might be a less change I mean, I don't, it's not a denigration of Hampton District to say there's not anyone growing into Hampton District as immediately as they are growing into Jackson and Wakefield District.
good point.
Good point.
And Piedmont's the same, although Madison's creeping up a little more every time we turn around.
Was that a motion?
That we move forward with A and B. I'll make that motion.
I'll second that motion. And so by moving forward, we're talking about instructing staff to
We would
draft
prepare
an
ordinances
Okay.
and a companion map for A and B, suitable for adoption as an ordinance, and then language that would be put into an ad that would be descriptive enough for people to understand what they meant, and schedule a public hearing based on the notice requirements.
Great.
That's good.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Patrick, thanks a lot for
Mr. Frazier, I didn't get your
hanging out.
vote.
I'm sorry, I was muted again. I'm an aye.
Thank you, sir. So ayes have it, 5. All right,
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Pat.
That's a lot of work. Appreciated.
Thank you, Matthew.
Rappahannock, Rapidan Region Legislative Issues.
Mr. Monty is here, but attached to this agenda item, the draft regional platform. The body was going to consider potentially adopting this at the December meeting. There was not a quorum, so it wasn't adopted. It's developed by Mr. James and his team, and through communication with members of the commission. The Board of Supervisors could adopt this platform as your platform. You could adopt portions of this. You could do nothing and use this to inform you in your communication with your legislators at the state level going forward. It's good information. Really, no action needs to happen, but could happen if you so desire. We could try to answer questions if you have any about any of these positions. And we've talked in the past, some of them may be important to the region, like some of the transportation issues, while they may not be so important to you, and it would be more of a situation of supporting your neighbors as opposed to wanting to get smart scale money here for projects that we don't have.
I mean, historically, we do recommend these. We make a motion and adopt these,
We
correct?
did, I believe, the last couple of years, the board accepted the regional platform and endorsed it as your own. That final step at the commission never happened, and so I just want to make that aware and why it's identified as draft. I don't see anything in these positions that are counter to what this board is likely to think.
Well, if there's not likely to be many changes from this draft and the board is so disposed, I'd make a motion that we go ahead and endorse this legislative regional platform.
I will second your motion.
We have a motion and a second. Just one question, because I don't know how the relationships work. I know the likelihood of getting unfunded mandates in front of anyone at this point is probably slim, but is there a reason we don't take that type of issue up for especially the rural counties?
Madam Chair, if you're asking my opinion, I know it is discussed a lot, and I think it probably flows through a lot of the pieces in here, especially the tax revenues. I also think that, Mr. James, as Mr. Curry said, works pretty closely with VACO and VML, who a lot of times carry those more effectively than a regional liaison. The other thing I would say about this document that's in front of you is one of the major changes from past years is previously this went in as a VACO Region 7 legislative platform, which also includes the Fredericksburg area. This year, and not so much last year, but mostly this year, the Fredericksburg area sort of pulled out of that agreement with Mr. James. So this is solely for the 5 counties in the Rappahannock Rapidan region. I think if you brought something forward about unfunded mandates, there would be universal support to include that if there was desire.
And then the other question I have is the rural caucus. I just started getting interested in that group. Do you work with them as well?
I do. I actually serve on the board of the Council for Rural Virginia as a Planning District Commission representative and work with Christy Proctor there. So I think she is a very valuable resource, certainly on the lobbying and legislative front, and also in terms of connections with not only state but federal government advocates as well, if there are specific items like that. So if there are messages to carry back, I'm happy to carry those.
Okay, thank you.
And I would just, if platforms like this, taking broad swipes and saying we don't like unfunded mandates, that they aren't going to do anything. If there are specific positions on specific items, bills, comp board, funding, you really would need to focus on those specific things.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, I'm sorry for that, but we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Did we lose him?
Mr. Frazier somehow dropped, so I'll note that in the
Yep.
minutes.
Thank you. All right, town boundary line change request. Thank you, Patrick.
Madam Chair, could
Yes,
we
sir.
take,
5-minute recess?
please?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the recess.
Thank you.
Mr.
Hold on one second.
Oh, sorry. All right, Mr. Frazier dropped off. I know he was having some issues with either generator or Comcast, so it may be that he's just having technical difficulties. Next on the agenda is the town boundary line change request.
Yes, Madam Chair, as you're aware, the Board of Supervisors, or I believe you specifically, received a letter from the town back in November suggesting that the town felt that a boundary line adjustment for the parcel in the corner of Lee Highway and Warren Avenue owned by Mr. Ockery would make sense to pull that into the limits of the town. Of course, it would still remain in the county, but it would be within the limits of the town. In that letter, they requested the Board of Supervisors to consider their suggestion that the town limits be expanded in that area, and asked for the board to consider that very quickly. including having a public hearing, I believe, at this meeting. As you're well aware, we're not doing that, and the topic is certainly very involved, and the Code of Virginia provides a process through which two public bodies can decide through a mutual agreement that the boundary can change, but there is a process to get to that mutual agreement if there is one. With that said, it's not clear to me, and I imagine individually the board, whether the board has a position on how you would want to move through a process of deciding how to determine if there's a mutually agreeable position. You can do anything you really want. There are some representatives from the town here today, I think, wanting to hear the board's current thinking on this matter, and whether there is potential for forward motion towards a mutual agreement. Such an agreement could include just about anything that made sense to both bodies, and that's the key thing here. It's mutual, and if there isn't a position that makes sense to both bodies, then it just can't happen through this mechanism supported by the Code of Virginia, Section 15.2.3106. I've rambled on about that probably more than I needed to. Most of the board members already are well versed in what this is about and the process forward, and this is an opportunity for you to speak together that you really haven't had that opportunity so far. And Mr. Frazier has rejoined us.
Oh, good.
Madam Chair, I have a question for Mr. Goff. So our packet for today's meeting cites to 15.2.3106. If I understand correctly, that provision in state code pertains to a boundary line adjustment by mutual agreement. And if I understand correctly further, is there not a separate provision in state code that would permit the property owner to force such an adjustment in the boundary line by way of annexation, absent an agreement between the two involved localities?
Yeah, there's a whole other article in the code beginning with 15.2.3200 on annexation.
Mr. Frazier might not be able to hear you, sir.
All right. Is he able to
Can
hear?
you give him the
You
mic?
just cozy up closer to over here so they can see you his mic.
Come on in.
Can you hear now, Mr. Frazier?
Yeah, it looks like you should be able to.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, the agreement section is Article 2 of that, and Mr. Curry cited it, 3106.
You said 15.2.3200?
And then annexation generally is 3200, if I'm not mistaken here. Now, insofar as the owners of property, under an agreement, they have an automatic right to step in if they object. I'm looking at subsection B of 3109, which says, notice of any application is provided in subsection A hereof shall be served upon the property owners, if any, of the area affected by the agreement. And if such property owners object to the change, meaning the boundary line change, they shall be permitted to intervene in the proceedings and show cause why the boundary line should not be changed. So, but I believe that under the general civil procedure rules, that an owner could be an intervener in the petition to intervene in the petition if they were in favor of it. I'll have to discuss that in more detail with whomever the new town council, town attorney might be, and also Mr. Ockery, since he's the owner, with his lawyer, Mr. Foote, to see if that is his intention to become part of the petition as a party. That's something that I think we probably ought to know, whether he intends to do that, before you consider anything, because if he's not in there, it's just the county and the town. And there's no binding agreement as to what's gonna happen with the property that's being annexed into the town. I know there's representations being made, but I think we'd like to have, at least some pretty hard assurances that whatever plan that they're asking you to consider is a reason to agree to the boundary line adjustment, that somehow it was going to be legally enforceable. And what occurs to me is if he could be an intervener in the petition and therefore he's before the court, any court order that contained what the agreement was would then be binding on him too. So, and that's not something I think that has been fleshed out. Mr. Curry and I did meet with Mr. Bennett for about an hour or so, and that topic was brought up as a concern that I thought that you, as my client, the board would have. Number one, details. And two, how do we know that they're actually going to come to fruition, and to what extent is the property owner going to be bound by what the town is proposing happen? So that was the kind of the threshold procedural issue that we wanted to see fleshed out.
Thank you. Going back to my initial inquiry, I just think that it seems that something that has been lost in the public discussion of this requested boundary line adjustment from the town is that, and I believe you were pointing to the operative provision in state code, is that if the county and the town fail to reach a mutually called beneficial agreement regarding the requested change, the property owner, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the property owner in that case could simply go to court and force the change, absent a friendly agreement.
The property owner?
I think the town.
The town would.
I don't think the property owner can force the town to.
Okay, so,
annex.
but the town could go to court
Yeah, the town.
if we fail to reach an agreement.
Sure.
It's an entirely different process with the Commission of Local Government, and there's a lot of.
I think can I interject a second? I don't think that they can force the county to do something. I think they could try to force an agreement.
Well, that's what I
Wouldn't be
mean.
much of an agreement if you forced it, right?
Well, but that's not exactly the way you said it, sir. You said that they would force an agreement.
I'm
They
sorry.
could try to force the agreement.
What I meant to say was force the boundary line adjustment absent a friendly agreement between the county and the locality.
That's what annexation is.
But that doesn't mean that they would be successful in court.
I'm not,
And we've already had that threat by Mr. Ashel, that subject to the town and county not reaching an agreement, that we would wind up in court over it. That is not exactly a friendly way to start a boundary talk, discussion.
right. So the reason I asked the question is I want to make sure that we all start out this discussion with an understanding of how this could go. Either it could go by way of some negotiated agreement, or failing a negotiated agreement between the county and the town, we might be in a position, and thank you for correcting me, where the town could go to court and try to annex the corner and pull it into within the town boundary.
Yes.
And I just want to make, those are basically two parallel paths that all of this could go down, and I just think it's important for us and members of the public to understand that. I'm not starting out a discussion to say that we will or will not reach an agreement. I just think we need to have baseline parameters on which we're talking about any of this, and I'm trying to make it clear in my own mind, as you can tell by my question. So,
But if we will, I think that the public needs to know that some of the preliminary discussion as put forth by Mr. Ashel was the threat of legal action if we didn't follow through with their plans.
yeah, and I just wanted to make sure from our own attorney that there is in fact a provision in state code that would allow the town basically to try to force a change as another possible avenue for pulling the 3.8 acres or whatever it is into the area that is the town.
So, Mr. Curry, I think we probably all have questions that need to be asked. I'm just wondering if a work session makes sense for this type of discussion as well. I know we couldn't get it done for today, but we could at least sit down, prepare questions that each individual board member has, and then try to get those answered at that same time.
I think there are probably each board member has many questions, and the topic of annexation, understanding that process is very complex. I don't believe Mr. Angel was speaking for the town. I think he worked on it as a town representative, as a committee level, but I'm pretty sure he's not on town council, or was authorized to speak for the town, so he's just a citizen of the town. But being able to understand the process and how you want to navigate the process, if you want to navigate the process, probably is some involved conversation for a work session. It would be probably would make good sense to do that. And at some point in time, it would make very good sense for there to be a meeting between the Board of Supervisors and the Town Council. If you're going to find a way towards a mutually agreeable position, then it seems to me you're going to have to sit in a room with everybody there and talk it through and determine probably quickly whether you have a hope of getting to a mutual position or not. And then, as Mr. Goff noted, if the owner in particular has thoughts on what is going to happen with that parcel, how can they be bound into whatever agreement? And how can that be done legally and enforceably through the courts, if that is part of this mutual position of the bodies?
And Madam Chair, since Mr. Whited and Mr. Catlin are here, if it's okay, I do have sort of a threshold question or two that I'd like to ask them, if they'd be willing to.
I'm fine with that.
Sure. Two threshold questions. So we've talked before and had a presentation by Mr. Ackeray some time ago.
Right.
Related to the Rush River Commons project. And then there was a preliminary mention of the possible need for a boundary line adjustment related to the 3.8 acres on the corner. And just for the record, and I don't know if you're prepared to answer it, but one question that still is not clear in my mind, and I think it's important that we clear it up so that we're working off of common and established and understood facts, is to what extent is this request from you all in this letter in fact tied to a need for the boundary line adjustment in order to provide water and sewer services to the corner? Is it I mean, can you or can you not provide water and sewer to the corner portion of that parcel absent a boundary line adjustment?
It is our understanding that we cannot.
And based on your bondholder or?
Yes, I don't have the specific information here with me.
Yeah, yeah.
But it goes beyond, as I think I pointed out in the letter, that we have some potential legal constraints with the bonds that allowed us to create the original wastewater system. But there is also concern that that there would be a precedent set, and that all of a sudden the limited amount of capacity that we do have would be used up without the town being able to have some control over it. So there are a lot of different questions, a lot of different issues, and I want to say a couple of things. One, we are all, even if we are citizens of the town, we are also citizens of the county, and we have an interest in doing something for the community. I'm not going to go through all the stuff because that's not what you're asking at this point. But I do want to stress that we are interested in getting into a friendly discussion
to try to resolve this. Because my understanding from Mr. Ackrey and the evidence we've seen so far with the first parcel that was done within the town is that he is doing this for the benefit of the community. And so I agree with Mr. Goff, that's something that we're interested in, having an understanding of what he is going to be doing with this property.
Well, that's a perfect segue into my next question. I've heard from a number of citizens, and I'll tell you, it's also my own view, for whatever that's worth, that the town did a very thorough job through your planning commission and your town council regarding the Rush River Commons project. I believe your ARB was involved, and I congratulate you all for giving it a thorough workover, for lack of a better phrase. I saw some drilling going on recently and some new survey tape, and what I've heard from some citizens, primarily outside of the town, is that this, and this is with all due respect to the private property owner, who obviously has certain by right uses of those parcels. For a lot of people in our county, a county that is very much a county of no or only incremental change, to have the Rush River Commons project proceeding as it is, and it seems like you all have managed it very well, and then to put on top of that this boundary line adjustment request at the same time leaves many people uneasy. And so my question, before we go too far down the road of having further discussions, is, for the sake of our citizens in a broad sense, primarily outside of the town, who don't have as strong of a handle on the details of the Rush River Commons project, and out of respect for them, and out of respect for the fact that this is a county of little, no, or incremental change,
Right.
why can we not wait some time before we take on this boundary line adjustment request? Why can't we see the Rush River Commons project and allow people to get comfortable with the aesthetic, with the level of increased traffic, with the level of intensity and development? Because one citizen spoke previously about the principles and goals within the comprehensive plan, and obviously we have to take those seriously. I mean, that document's important to all of us. But it just seems like this is a lot all at once for a lot of people. And as one member of this board representing, roughly 1,500 citizens, I have to be sensitive to those who've been here for decades and decades and decades, who've never seen any kind of development. And I just ask respectfully if there isn't some way to just wait on this, to allow people to grow accustomed to what you all are doing within the town.
Sure. And the request for the town to pursue this boundary line adjustment comes from a couple of things. One is, it is a request from Mr. Ackrey, who's not getting any younger. And I think this is a life-defining mission that he has, to do something for the community. I think on a more tangible level for him, there is some economies of scale, but more importantly, he is able, I think, because the two pieces of property have an amount of wetlands on them, and some of the wetlands may have to be replaced with other developed wetlands, that it becomes easier to develop a comprehensive plan if you're involving the entire property, rather than dealing with just one component and then trying to deal with the other component. Those would be my guesses, just from the conversations that I've heard, both as a member of the town council and throughout this process. I appreciate that It is a lot of change, because any change for many people is difficult. But there is a point right now where the county has been talking about some of the buildings that they're trying to figure out what they're going to do with. There is an opportunity for some community-oriented spaces to be built that will benefit the entire community, county and town, that could happen in this space. And so it seems to me that while I appreciate the idea of let's do the first part, let's see how it works, and then do the second part, I think that there are also some other things that saying, we went through a thorough process with the planned unit development. And we explored deeply and thoroughly how to do this thing and be careful about it. And there are some good reasons, as I just mentioned, for incorporating them all now. And so I think we want to at least begin the process of exploring this with the county at this time. I'll ask my colleague, anything that you would like to add?
Yeah, I just add that we received a request and we had to act on it.
Come up, thanks.
Just to Fred's point about timeline, we received a request from the property owner, or the applicant, Joe Head, the town council, and we had to act on that and therefore forward it to the county at certain points. So it wasn't that we're necessarily driving a timeline more quickly. And frankly, some of us probably would have preferred to slow down a little bit, but we received the application, we moved on it, and then our next step is, of course, pass it on to the county as the next governing body to start this process of working together to see if we can find some mutually agreed position.
Thank you.
I did want to speak to the timeline because, I mean, I think that, you know, just a month or two to work on this is not sufficient, especially with all the other things we have going on. You know, we're going to have work sessions on several things in the next couple of months, budget, broadband. The town, I believe I read, worked on these proposals for 17 months. And I would just, I keep thinking of the words of one of the Culpeper supervisors in the NAACP forum that the candidates, Mr. Carney and I, Mr. Miller, participated in. One of the Culpeper supervisors said the most difficult thing he ever worked on was the boundary line adjustment between the town and the county. That was absolutely the hardest thing he'd done as a Board of Supervisors member. And so I think that we should not be frivolous or quick in this action, that we need to be very deliberate on all counts and fronts. And I just want to set that expectation up front, and I hope my peers are on board with it.
I do know the county has been through this before with another piece of
I think there have been a
property.
couple parcels that have been, taken into the town. I, of course, wasn't here for those, but
Okay. I didn't know if there's any past
if those were
history.
residential parcels, split parcels, it tends to be an easier process.
They were split parcels.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was on the board when we did at least one.
I don't know if you recall, I'm just wondering the process you went through then.
It was fairly simple. It was just trying to bring a couple of lots, kind of square things up, and that was just before they started the new sewer system. But anyway, I have some comments when it comes time for me to make a few
I think
about this particular one.
you can go now.
Okay, first I looked at the letter that the mayor sent us, and some of it is some of his comments or claims on this 15, 16 points here are misconstrued on his part. I'm taking a quick look because I've been working without electricity, and I'd like to tell you that right now, Newtown Road is backed up, and the phones are working. That's why I was absent for a while. When the power company made the switch, it put me in the dark. So anyway,
Glad you're back.
it looks like everything's back up and working like it was pre-January 3rd. So looking here at looking here at paragraph 4 of the mayor's letter to the board, he uses the phrase, that could be interpreted. That is not legal definitive language in my layman's knowledge of legal terminology. So I don't know that we should put a whole lot of weight on that until we get some interpretation from both our county attorney and, maybe others, but certainly we should have that phrase fleshed out, as Mr. Goss used that phrase earlier, fleshed out. Then we get to paragraph 6. In addition to the corner, the ARB ensures that property values are sustained by ensuring that construction does not degrade the value of the property or neighboring properties. That statement appears to make the Board of Supervisors look unable to do the same. I kind of take exception to that, if you will, Mr. Mayor. And then back here to paragraph 10, it's an incorrect statement to start with, as if maybe you didn't really look at our zoning ordinance, the county zoning ordinance, when you made that. That we don't have an ability to funnel growth into the villages. Certainly the county board of supervisors through their zoning ordinance has the ability to funnel growth into the village areas. So then when I look at 12, it kind of looks like coercion or fear-mongering here, that if we don't approve this boundary adjustment, that the owner of that parcel may just sell to somebody who will build a Sheetz or a 7-Eleven there. Why do we get into stuff like this? I don't understand. I mean, why do we even start, while we're talking about being friendly, why do we even start with a letter like this? You kind of poke us 2 or 3 times, tell us that we're not able to do what we know that we are qualified to do, and then say that if we don't do what you want to do, your former spokesperson, Mr. Aichel, who may not have been speaking for you at that meeting last month, threatened legal action, and now you're saying that if we don't do this, we're liable to wind up with something that we don't want. That's a threat. So we've actually been threatened twice, at bare minimum. Threatened twice. And before I want to go any further with this one, I want to know what's going to be happening. You know, is the town going to be looking at going down the Old Mill Road there, bringing in the Old Mill, because September 21, we had an article where the owner of that property said that he had to have water and sewer extended to it. If you're not extending it to this one outside of town, you'd have to bring that property in. So the town just keeps growing. We really need an overall picture of where the town and county are going in the very near future. 1, 2, 5 years down the road. So I think those kind of questions need to be addressed, and you can do that at the work session, I believe.
Thank you. I do believe setting up a work session is probably the wisest move. It's how do we make sure that use that time wisely? Do we know how to set up the boundaries that we're talking about, and how we can really focus on what is allowed, what isn't allowed, what the board has the authority to do and doesn't, that kind of.
Well, staff can certainly help guide you through what the Code of Virginia states for the agreement process and the other process. We can make sure you're informed there. As far as what can be included in the agreement, I'm led to believe that it's anything that's mutually agreeable. It's really wide open. Ultimately, the court does have to approve it, but I'm led to believe that if the 2 localities, public bodies, find it acceptable after the public hearings that each body must hold, then the court is not likely to impose their will on the legislative decisions of the bodies.
Yeah, it really ends with 15.23108, if you can reach a very detailed agreement as to the location of the new boundary line. And then the court would approve it. If the procedures to advertise the public hearings and what's contained in 3107 have been followed, if the court makes findings that they have. So, we would be obviously building a record towards that. And I do think that 3109B doesn't preclude the owner from becoming an intervener. So I think that, and I'll talk to Mr. Foote about that if the board decides to go any further, to see if it's possible if Mr. Opry is gonna be an intervenor and be part of this petition. So, yeah, that's the kind of the first legal issue. I wanna talk to someone who has done this before, about the impact of that subsection B on an intervenor in a totally separate statute under 3108. So, and then I had suggested to Mr. Curry, and I don't know what the board would feel about this, if you're gonna have a work session, that it be advertised perhaps, if the town council will so advised, to be a joint, work session with, the town council.
I'm glad you raised that, because I just had a question whether or not, I mean, we're having a very broad high-level discussion here. We have a letter. Appreciate Mayor Catlin and Mr. Whited being here. And we've asked some preliminary kind of starting point questions. I just wonder if we're ready for a joint work session with the town council. I understand your point that that's one way to jump into the weeds and start hashing things out, but this is a request that has been placed upon us. We didn't invite the request, and so to that end, I frankly feel more comfortable as a starting point to talk as a county board of supervisors, so that we each can dive into more detail on our concerns, questions, what we've heard from our citizens, in my case, including citizens within the town of Washington. And then once we complete that initial discussion, perhaps pivot to a joint work session with the town. But I'm a little uncomfortable jumping into a joint work session before we've had a chance to dive in ourselves.
I agree with you.
If I may add to your comments, Mr. Whitson, when Mr. Curry and I met with Mr. Bennett, it's my recollection, Mr. Curry, correct me if I'm wrong, that we both agreed that the town, in conjunction with the property owner, should provide a more detailed proposal of exactly what it is that they want to do, so that you all aren't like talking in a vacuum.
Correct.
We would need to know what precisely that it is that they propose, and how they propose the mechanics of it would work as far as a petition before the circuit court. So I thought we made it clear to Mr. Bennett that we kind of wanted that as a preliminary communication before my client would entertain any offers. Make us an offer. Tell us what you want us to agree to in detail. That way the public is apprised as well, and they can have some input individually with their supervisors as to the pros and cons of what's being proposed. So I would maybe suggest, and I'm just making a suggestion to my client, that perhaps a letter from the chairman to the town council saying, hey, sure, we'd like to talk to you, but we want to know what we're going to talk about in some detail before we would go forward with a work session, might be in order, just so that you have an agenda before you. What are you going to talk about?
So if we took that approach and the town government responded in detail, that might obviate the need for a standalone board of supervisors only work session, I think is your point. That is, if we had enough details with which to wrestle, then perhaps a joint work session could be productive, and a solo board of supervisors one might not be needed. And I sound incredibly bureaucratic, but I'm just trying to think of a logical way to proceed.
I'm concerned that you all would be wasting your time to talk about this.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Without having an offer before you.
But once we get more detail, at that time, we could decide whether we want to proceed initially on our own to discuss or join them together.
Right.
Okay, good guidance.
So if I understood that correctly, we could authorize me to send a letter to the town asking for more detail on what they're specifically expecting from us and of the landowner as well.
Is that a motion?
I don't want to make it for myself.
I'll go ahead and make a motion that we authorize the chair to respond to the town of Washington in written form, notifying them of our need for additional details related to the parcel, and also details related to the parcel and possible uses of that parcel, and then also any specific offers in the context of a negotiated agreement for a boundary line adjustment. Does that cover everything?
I would think so, and especially including the position of the property owner vis-a-vis his willingness to enter into this agreement as a party. And like I said, that's a legal matter too, I need to discuss.
Right. So, I mean, the purpose of my motion is then to solicit from the town more details about what physically is intended for the, I'm just gonna say 3.8 acres, because I think that's the latest number that's been batted around. What is specifically intended from a physical standpoint, but also what offer the town might make in the context of an agreement. And then third, the potential willingness of the property owner. Would it be to join in any sort of negotiated agreement as an intervener?
Well, just less technical than that, simply to what extent is the property owner willing to be bound by any agreement?
Okay. That's my motion, as painful as it is.
The motion, do I have a second?
I'll second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion.
I just want to make sure that in the supporting documentation that we're seeking, that we're also seeking some maps, specifics like that. Is that the sort of specifics that we're seeking as well? I mean, it's a boundary line.
Yeah, in my mind, that would go along with whatever the intended physical uses would be.
Okay, yeah, I just want to make
I
sure
mean, I
that
think
we're,
that's kind of baseline information.
yeah. Well, I mean, we had a letter and a part of code reference, which apparently was not, it only pertained to one of the scenarios. So we certainly need to know what other scenarios can unfold in this process as well.
If I could, I'd also like to see some legal documentation as to why the town believes that it can't extend water and sewer outside the boundaries.
Madam,
What this could be, the Board of Supervisors should not be making any assumptions. We should know exactly what the limitations of each body is.
Mr. Frazier, thank you for that. And if Mr. Carney would agree to amend his second, I will amend the motion to include a fourth request, which is documented clarification and explanation regarding the extent to which the town is precluded from extending water and sewer service outside the current existing town boundary. Thank you, Mr. Frazier. I appreciate you adding that.
Mr. Carney, you okay with that?
And yes, I will amend my second.
So I believe there are four specific requests, and embedded within request number one, which is contemplated physical uses on the parcel. Ms. Smith wisely bolstered that with a request for a map.
I know it's
a
a
map.
3-letter word that's almost a 4-letter word, but
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Do you have that, Mr. Curry?
Sure.
I'm sure the tape does. All right, I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you,
Thank
sir.
Thanks a lot for sitting here so long.
Yes. Let's see, we are now into the addendum 220105.
Well, Mr. Frazier started this, I believe, during the last agenda item, gave us a good report from Viewtown Road. As everybody is painfully aware, we had a significant snow event. We're very fortunate here compared to those communities to our east who had a very, very significant snow event, heavy wet snow, many, many outages. REC has been working very hard to try to get those outages resolved, although they are overwhelming. Participated in conference calls with REC over the last couple days, and today, one-on-one with REC with myself and Mr. Polster, who just stepped into the room, in which they provided a bit more guidance for us on their activities. Board members and the public should be aware and attuned to the, Mr. Polster's leaning on the dimmer switches.
When we're talking about REC, don't dim the lights, please.
Yeah. The outage system that REC has is new, and they continue to improve it, but it does a pretty good job right now. As you drill in, you'll see details on work locations. You can't be confused to think that that is the precise location of a break. There's a legend that identifies the number of meters that are out, accounts that are out. So for example, this star near Rock Mills shows 101 to 500. If one were to click on that, you'd see it's 188.
December 6th, Board of Supervisors.
Okay. Well, that was fed back through from Mr. Frazier.
No, it was a glitch in the matrix.
And you can see that outage is assigned to a crew. Mr. Frazier noted here recently that Viewtown, an outage at his location was resolved, although there are still outages identified in that area, and they're assigned to a crew. So it does take some time for feedback into this system. I did analyze, and let me just follow up. If you come to the summary and look at totals, you can see that on the whole for Rappahannock County, they're showing 710 continued members affected. That's meter points out of 5,000, which is 14% of in Rappahannock of our citizens meters without power. We don't have any other service provider of any significance here. And that's obviously a lot, but that number has been going down. One of the very important things that REC told us is that as they work further into the system and turn on the distribution lines, they will identify issues further downstream. And the very end of that is the service drop from a pole to a person's house, which could be damaged. And those are likely not to necessarily be known about until the broader issues are fixed. Looking at all of that, I did add up some of the numbers earlier today. I might have with me of the earlier today as of, I don't think it was 650. There were 469 of those locations in the county that were either assigned a crew was en route on scene. So that means those are at least on the list to be addressed. A crew might be assigned multiple locations in a circuit, and so it might take some time, a day or more, for them to get to it. But there is some hope that they will be able to significantly improve their stance over the next couple of days. They did warn that those furthest circuits, service drops into their network could easily drag on multiple days, and citizens need to be thinking very carefully about their alternative heating sources, safety, other locations where they can care for themselves and their family, knowing that we do have some cold days ahead. I'm just zoomed in on Rappahannock here, but as I noted earlier, those localities to our east really took a beating, and we're really quite fortunate. It's an overwhelming event for REC, and they have more than doubled their crew size from outside companies coming in to help them. REC did say they were going to have somebody on our meeting. They stuck around for a while, but a little too much sausage today for them. Let me see what else I wanted to mention. There has been some discussion from other localities about a local declaration of an emergency. The board, we talked a lot about this during the pandemic. At this point, I don't believe that's necessary. I think we have all the tools we need at this point to do what we need to do under the normal rule of law. If something were to change quickly and require a very quick action on that, and because I'm designated as the Director of Emergency Management, I could take a very quick action, declare a local emergency, take those matters, actions if necessary, and then the board could ratify that at their next regular board meeting. Let's see, what else? We have been working with our neighboring localities regarding potential sheltering needs for warming or for showers and power at Fauquier at the Wharf. And just today, I noticed during the meeting, actually thanks to introduction by Mr. Carney this morning, Reynolds Memorial has agreed to be a warming station for our citizens where they, should they need a place local, which is in Sperryville. I imagine there are other churches that may be similarly inclined or maybe doing that with their parishioners already. You know your community better than I know your community probably, and we have many citizens that are helping their neighbors, and hopefully they're all checking in on their neighbors to make sure that they're all right. I did attach the preliminary totals of the snow, and this map does show why we are fortunate compared to our neighbors. And if you align that snow overlay with the 6 inches with the outage, kind of lines right up.
Yeah.
And that eastern end of our county and then into Culpeper and Fredericksburg, where you've heard so much about 95, you can see why they had so much. I'd heard reports of 4 to 5 inches of snow an hour in some of those areas, which is really overwhelms the ability of the crews.
Yeah.
Mr. Polster and I could try to answer any questions you have, and if you have anything that I didn't mention.
Just what's the practical effect of an emergency declaration?
Well, the intent is that there are certain things within the normal rule of law that you can accomplish. So it would allow us perhaps to take some purchasing measures that we wouldn't otherwise do, or make critical decisions outside of a board meeting. You're basically giving me much more authority than I normally have to make critical major decisions on the fly, which is kind of interesting that I could just do that anyway and get ratification afterwards. It should be with consent of the board, and I certainly would do that before I took that action. But there's nothing that we can think of right now that needs that sort of action of the county that would have to waive our current rules or anything like that.
I guess my only concern right now, I mean, we all drive 30 minutes to anything, but the idea of people driving to Warrenton as their primary place to get warm or take a shower concerns me a little bit, especially elderly people, and especially given that we've been having overnight refreezes, and then we've got snow coming tomorrow, and we don't know what that's ultimately going to look like. So I guess my question is, and thank you for your effort with Reynolds. I think that's great news, but do we have, I mean, I'm thinking of the schools, is there any way that we could, should the need arise?
Well, I think a lot of that is driven by demand, and
Sure, that's my question.
The 911 dispatch center has been aware of opportunities available should they be contacted, and it's my understanding they have not been contacted, or.
I'm going to have speakers if you want to.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
So more directly, we really take this as a regional approach with Fauquier, Town of Warrenton, Culpeper, and ourselves. And no one county's seen a huge overwhelming need.
Okay.
So we really try to pool our resources at this point. Typically on day 3 is when you're going to start to see people saying, look, I need power,
Yeah.
my phone's dead, I need a shower. So we're kind of there now. The biggest need we've seen today is a lot of people without power at their well and their livestock not having water.
Mm-hmm.
So we're really working through some of those issues and trying to work with some local resources to be able to get the horses, the cows, and others water to feed their livestock. You bring up an interesting point about the storm, the incoming and pending that, but just some data real quick. So Culpeper offered us the other day hotel rooms. One of the things we see right now with COVID is we don't really want to put somebody in a congregate setting.
Yeah.
So one of the things the Department of Emergency Management suggested is looking at pooling your resources and doing hotel rooms. So Culpeper right now has 5 of their residents in hotels in Culpeper, no Rappahannock residents. We've offered it, but no one's afforded us that opportunity yet. Warrenton, they've had 72 people visit the wharf today. Out of those 72, 9 were Rappahannock residents that went there to visit that for mainly showers. I did have the opportunity to speak with Ms. Gail Crooks at DSS today. Again, we're in close contact with them because if we do open a shelter or facility, that's one of the resources we're required to have. She's had no requests for services today. She did reach out to somebody she knew of, but they said they do not want any help at this time. So right now, one of the things I'm really seeing, and I'm new to the job, is that people in Rappahannock are really resilient and they really take care of each other. So the biggest thing I would say that if you know somebody in need, please let us know, contact dispatch, and we can get the resources they need to them. We are prepared if we need to open up another warming shelter or a power shower station. But as you know, a shelter comes with a lot of other legal ramifications and things that we have to do to put a shelter up.
Sure.
Well, and the library's open as well, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, any really county buildings, if somebody need to be warned during the day, they could certainly use that.
Okay. Thanks a
I
lot.
know one question, I know when Mr. Frazier and I texted about his outage, he also said that landlines were out. So I don't know, I mean, it just as Rappahannock County again, how does someone without the ability to make a call ask for help?
And this is one of the things that we were talking about this morning, is using our community network. And again, one of the things I've seen in Rappahannock is neighbors helping neighbors, driving down that lane to the person you know, are you okay, do you need anything? And the message we're getting at this point is their wood stove's fine and their freezer's stocked. So they're fine for now, but just keep checking on neighbors. Like you mentioned, they're calling for 2 to 4 inches more snow. Just got off a weather call, so we'll put a report out on that. But again, continue checking on neighbors. If you have any needs, please let us know so we can identify those and we can make sure they get taken care of.
Thanks a lot. Ms. Olson from the Benevolent Fund is here. Do you want to add anything? Have you any anecdotes or want to add to the discussion?
I'm Bernie Olson from the Rappahannock Benevolent Fund. I did get a call yesterday, just anecdotally, that 2 elderly people were in the house and they don't have the information. There's no phone. They called on a cell phone, but they didn't have a landline and no electricity. So, and I have no electricity or power right now too, so I'm enjoying camping right now. So I think we just need to, figure out some way to, and I've had a good conversation with Sean about this, how we can work together as a community to really find those places that people really get the information needs to go to people. Because right now, I was at home on Monday and I had no idea that I could call the dispatch and get water or get whatever I needed. These people needed water desperately the other day, and so I sent somebody from the rescue squad down there to get water. So I think it's, I'm going to go back to the Benevolent Fund and talk to my board and say, we need to work on something to have something in place when these things have happened. And if it's the churches that take up that flag, that'll be great. But I do want to work with the county as well and whatever we can do to really make this known when things happen. And the other thing I want to say is, there's a lot of people in this community that can just pad out in their slippers out to their garage and flip on the generator, and they don't think that there are a lot of people that don't have generators or that they only have electricity. They don't have, I'm fortunate I have a wood stove and propane heat, so I'm really lucky in that regard. So anyway, that's why I'm here today, just because I want to keep pushing this. I think if we have a really huge disaster in this county, are we ready for it? Are we ready to put people in places that need some shelter and places for people to be okay? So thank you.
And we did appropriate funds for the generator at the schools for this purpose. Isn't that correct?
Well, it is for shelter. Of course, the school could be stood up as a shelter, has power. That is a huge undertaking, and we would want to have some pretty good assurance that people are going to go.
Right. Yeah.
And that is that. If we got there, we would have a local declaration, because then begin to talk about costs and recovery and potential state and federal funding if there is a state or federal declaration. So those are other things that would come into play there. I do think there's great opportunity with some sort of resource council that could be formed. I had some conversations with a few other people not too long ago about that. In my last community, did that rather effectively, the different faith-based and community-based groups getting together and sharing ideas, and then being a network to push information out. So that's something I think we can work on during sunny days, so that we're more prepared on less sunny days.
Right.
Fire and rescue also usually has a really good grasp of who's in what neighborhood and if they need checked on, if they're on some sort of medical support that requires electricity, things like that too.
When our dispatch has a routine process daily, they reach out to a group of seniors who are vulnerable, and it's an everyday keep check process to make sure that they're doing okay, and if there isn't a verbal contact, a deputy visits. So, that sort of thing could be used, has been used, and can be used further. But staff will continue to analyze the situation. If something pops up that is just completely unforeseen, we'll let you know and we'll take quick action. If you hear people, your constituents, reach out to you, however they hear, through the newspaper or whatever means, please let us know that information. It is very difficult to get that two-way flow of information to some of our citizens. So anyway, and I would just lastly say, check on your neighbor, as we noted. Even if you don't know your neighbor, check on your neighbor.
With it being a multi-state event, I don't mean to interrupt, Gary, but there's no way to really, is there any way to really talk to RAC about the outages and ask them?
We have, and they are triaging the very best they can. They are bringing in more and more and more resources to expedite from different states, and there were 70,000 individual meters that were out, so it's really huge. And if you look at their service district and the swath of the storm, they pretty well overlay each other. So that's good from the standpoint of all the other cooperatives being able to pitch in and help. Yeah. But it's a monumental task. They're doing their absolute best. And I will say, Mr. Hua and his team were on a one-on-one video call with Sean and I earlier this afternoon. And so it's not always you have the CEO or whatever his title is engaging with us one-on-one, helping us understand where they are, what they're capable of, and what their plan is.
Yeah, no, it's very impressive. Mr. Pulser, thank you very much. You're doing a good job, and we're grateful to have you on our team. Really, it's nice to know someone's taking care of this stuff. And Mr. Curry also, so thank you. And the demand numbers that you mentioned are encouraging, but I think ultimately my bottom line concern is that if we get snow tomorrow and then another coastal storm develops 3 days later, I just want to make sure that we're in a position to move quickly to implement something before the demand numbers reach a critical point. And it sounds like we should be able to, but it might require an emergency declaration.
Sure.
Okay.
And a lot of coordination from a lot of different people.
Yeah.
Please let us know if we can support you in any way.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.
Given the time and the evening agenda item, I'm wondering if you board members would like to continue or recess until 7 o'clock with the agenda items that we haven't gone through added to the evening.
I think the evening meeting is quite light, so I'd be amenable to such an approach.
If you're inclined to do that, I would just want to know the order of things, and I would suggest that the public hearing take place at 7 o'clock. The first item on your agenda, and the other items follow in afterwards, which would be J and K.
We don't need to have a closed session, do we?
Oh, and we didn't talk about that at the beginning of the meeting. Judge Irby still has not made a ruling, and so there is no need to enter closed meeting.
Okay.
I think we need a motion to do that, don't we?
I think it would be very helpful.
It would be a motion to recess.
Amend the agenda to handle information, reports, correspondence, and matters presented by the board following the public hearing.
Okay. Put forward a motion that we move to our 7 p.m. session, item J, and item K that are part of the agenda adopted earlier.
With the public hearing starting at 7.
The public hearing shall remain in its place.
J and K after public hearing.
Correct, thank you.
Have a motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 All right, thank you.
Mr. Fraser will be the same Zoom information for this evening.